Chair of the Hawaii PUC, and I'm joined the virtual status conference by my colleagues, Commissioner Jennifer Potter and Commissioner Leo Suntien. The purpose of today's status conference is for the Commission to receive a number of updates as described in the agenda filed in the docket, as well as to ask Hawaiian Electric follow-up questions in response to recently issued Commission information requests related to system reliability and planning surrounding the retirement of the AES coal plant on Oahu, both the power plant on Maui. And just to speak very briefly about the format, the Commission is hosting the status conference through WebEx for the docket parties and presenters, but is live streaming the status conference for the public and stakeholders via the YouTube link provided on the Commission's website. With this link, the public and stakeholders will be able to view the status conference, but will not be able to provide comments during this afternoon's meeting. Commission's recording the status conference, and that recording will continue to be available on our YouTube channel. And per the agenda filed in the docket last week, we'll move through the various agenda items that I'll go over in a second. First up, we're intending to have an update from Scott Glenn, the State Energy Office, on the Governor's Powering Past Coal Task Force. I believe we may move actually first to the next agenda item, and that's an update on the Mahi solar project related negotiations. And we're going to hear from Clearway Energy Group. We've asked for an update from the Kupono solar project on their negotiations with Bright Canyon Energy. We're joined by Brian Kaloa and Hawaii Energy. He's going to discuss their plans related to fossil fuel plant retirements. We're also next after that would be the proposal filed by AES in this docket late last week on their concept to operate the AES plant on renewable biomass. We've asked HNEI to give an update on the reliability analysis. That information has been filed in this docket. So for those of you watching, you can go into the docket 2021-0024. That information should be up there, as well as Hawaii Energy's presentation. And then after all that, we'll be following up with our discussion of information request responses. So thank you, everyone. I do want to turn it over to Ren and Paul Gaynor first, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, everyone, for your participation today, and we'll turn it over to you guys first. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Aloha, everyone. Good afternoon. I wanted to, my name is Ren Westcote with Long Road Energy. And a few months ago at a status conference when we first started discussing the need to accelerate projects, I did explain that I didn't think that the Mahi solar project could be accelerated because of the needs of financing. But we were able to find a way. So I wanted to, and we sent a letter to this effect to the Commission a few weeks ago. I wanted to turn this over to Paul Gaynor, CEO of Long Road, to explain. Paul?
Great, thanks, Ren. Nice to meet you all virtually. The commissioners, it's great to meet you. Looking forward to the day when I can actually come back to Hawaii, which I hope is soon. It's also good to see a lot of familiar faces on the call. So anyway, we've been in Hawaii, not as Long Road, but in previous formations since 2004 when we started developing the Kaiaba Wind Project, which came online in 2006. That company was called First Wind. And under that umbrella, we developed a total of 7 projects, 4 wind and 3 solar. And all of those projects are now operating. By virtue of our long history in Hawaii and our continued presence in starting Long Road, means that, of course, we are fully supportive of Hawaii's goals to reach 100% clean energy. And as part of our development efforts, Mahi Solar is our biggest project and would be the largest renewable project that we've done to date, and potentially even in the state, up to 3% of the state's total goal, RPS goal. So a significant project. As Ren said, since the commission asked for ways to accelerate the projects. We've been thinking creatively, working with our own team, our contractors, equipment suppliers to come up with a plan to accelerate the project's construction by several months. And the short and substance of it is, if we purchase the long lead equipment earlier on our balance sheet, we can advance construction and the schedule to have the project online by the end of July 2023 and potentially sooner. So that's kind of where our efforts have led us. And just to put a little bit in more context, in the normal course of project development and financing, most of the large expenditures happen after a commercial financing or after a financial close. Our initial plans for Mahi was to spend about $21 million on long lead equipment. However, in order to accelerate the schedule, that amount would need to be 2.5 times or over $50 million out of pocket and ahead of a financial closing. So it can be done, it just takes money. This obviously means that we are taking on more risk, which does increase the cost. And we are estimating the risk premium for this acceleration would add 3 to 4% to the current price of the project. Of course, it will be up to the commission to decide if that is a reasonable price to pay to bring Mahi online 2 to 3 months sooner. So we're working collaboratively with Hawaiian Electric on this schedule. We have weekly meetings with the team in order to amend the PPA to enable the project to be completed more quickly. We plan to send this amendment to the commission for review in mid-July. In order to make this work, however, we would need a decision from the commission by mid-September of this year so that we can actually go ahead and effectuate the equipment purchases in enough time ahead in order for us to meet this new schedule. That's the quick high-level update. Happy to answer any questions as we go forth. And I guess we'll now turn it over to Hawaiian Electric.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. I don't have a ton to add to what Paul said. We have been working with Mahi since they submitted their proposal in the letter to the Commission. So we've instituted biweekly meetings and weekly meetings to work actually on the PPA amendment. And we received their pricing proposal late last week, which we're evaluating. We're expecting to receive a draft of a proposed PPA amendment today from Mahi Solar to look at that. And we've also received their schedules. And so we're evaluating in the schedules, you know, where can we work with them to further accelerate the project, and looking at things such as shortening our review period times from 30 days to 25 days, and working to get them out the collated IRS study results this month as well, and hoping to complete our facility study in July. So we're really working hard to work with Mahi to see where we can accelerate the schedule and move the project forward.
That concludes things from both sides?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, first I want to thank both of you for being able to come and present to us today. I want to thank Long Road for putting this, put the proposal forward. I don't think we have any other questions on our side. I just have one. The need for a decision by September. Can you elaborate on why that's the trigger?
Sure, Chair. To accelerate the construction, we need to have a lot of equipment on island, and some of the lead times are about 12 months for purchase. So a lot of the long lead equipment, including elements, the control house for the utility switching station, that would need to be ordered earlier. Battery components would need to be manufactured earlier. So a lot of these long lead equipment will need to make the decision and start purchasing by end of September. So we're hoping for a decision, a go, no go decision on whether to accelerate the project by that time.
Okay, appreciate it. I don't have any other questions. I think none other from our side. So thank you, folks. Ren said we can stick around. He's going to do some stand-up routine, so maybe that'll be at the end. Appreciate it. So let's move on. We've switched order. Scott Glenn is in the WebEx. So Scott, thanks for joining us. If you can give us an update from Powering Past Coal Task Force.
Aloha, Chair Griffin. Aloha, Commissioner Potter, Commissioner Sunshin. My apologies for being late, just some tech challenges. With respect to the Powering Past Coal Task Force, just wanted to provide a few updates. As a reminder for everyone, this was created on March 30th under executive order with the purpose to convene stakeholders to increase transparency, coordination, and collaboration, and urgency to timely facilitate, coordinate, and align project development and reviews by Hawaiian Electric, state, and county agencies for those measures that the PUC has identified as being needed to replace the coal plant. And the focus of the task force is on implementation and problem solving. It's not a policy-making body and does not replace the independent review of any participating agencies for purposes of permitting or regulation. Since it started in March 2021, we've seen the energy picture change quickly with respect to the options for the coal plant, just as we heard from Mahi, and we'll be hearing from others today. Some of our project operation dates have moved backwards with respect to September 1st, 2022. Others are making efforts to move their timelines forward, and we're looking at what are the coordination steps that would go along with a quicker pace, which is what we'd like to see. And then we're also digesting some of the newer initiatives that the PUC has selected, such as the emergency DR order, and other new ideas that are being put on the table that we'll be discussing later. There have been 3 task force meetings so far. The 4th is scheduled for next week. Again, the focus is on specific projects and initiatives. We're getting updates from stakeholders and a lot of education, mutual education about how people participate in the development process, what their role is, what are other people's roles, and then how do those roles connect to each other? And if something happens at one participant's stage, what are the ripple effects? And then similarly, if we try to move things up to be done sooner, what are the similar ripple effects on the other participants? One of the major things I think we're really pulling together is this common operating picture of the overall progress of the portfolio of the measures. And so we're starting to see things come into focus. Again, almost all of the projects right now are looking, their guaranteed commercial operation date is after September 1st, but what we're trying to stay cognizant of is that's a guaranteed date, and there's still potential. There's some float there where things could come on sooner. And then as the discussions that you're having with several of the folks here today, that Hawaiian Electric is having on whether that guaranteed commercial operations date could be moved sooner to really support the reliability questions. And then this schedule in turn helps shape a lot of the work that agencies are doing to keep track of projects. And just for kind of a timeline of some of the different moments for these projects, the PUC approved the Kapolei Energy Storage Project April 29th. They're now part of the task force. The PUC approved the microgrid services tariff on May 17th. The PUC also approved the emergency demand response program on June 8th. These are things we're still digesting and understanding how they fit into the work of the task force. Just also separately going on, the Land Use Commission approved the AES West Oahu special use permit on June 10th. And then the Oahu Planning Commission will be hearing the Mahi project coming up here June 23rd. Which we've all been active in participating in and working with the agencies to understand these projects better. I'd also just like to share with the Commission and folks that at the Energy Office, we've reallocated some of the federal funds we've received in the office to support the task force and renewable energy deployment. This is consistent with our overall strategic mission for the office, where we've identified renewable energy project deployment as one of our top priorities. And so we've created an additional staff position and recruited and filled the position. The person's now on the team. And then we also have brought on consultant support to help us with tracking overall schedule, dockets, and some of the various moving pieces that are going on. So I'll stop there. If folks have detailed questions about the task force and its work, I recommend reaching out either directly to me or to Cameron Black in our office, who's the point person at the Energy Office for supporting the task force. Thank you.
I'll just double check on our side. Scott, I don't believe we have any questions from the commission for you. No, doesn't look like it. So I just want to comment on a few things. Scott said it's not a decision-making, policy-making body. It's really an opportunity where we collectively, the group and Scott and the lead, are tracking all the various decision-making steps, permitting steps, other government approvals for the whole suite of projects and programs tied to safely retiring the coal plant. So it's an unprecedented effort in our state for a very complicated coordination exercise among all the different players here. So I want to thank him for leading that. I think the discussions have been constructive and positive. And at the very least, we're trying to hold the line on as many of these timelines and schedules as possible, and look forward to ideally making some progress to the left of the timeline schedule there. So thanks for your help in leading that, and we look forward to further participation on the task force.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, let's move. Next up is a request update from Clearway and Hawaiian Electric on the 2 projects there.
Great, thank you. Aloha, everyone, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Nicola Park, Origination Manager for Clearway Energy. Thanks for the opportunity to provide another update since the status conference in April, and also the filings that we've been making as part of the project dockets for Clearway's Mililani 1 and Waiawa solar projects. Since the last update, I'm pleased to report that we effectively closed financing on the debt, tax equity, and construction financing for both projects, an important milestone, as well as issued the full notice to proceed to Moss under the EPC agreements for both of the projects. So making progress across the board in terms of accelerating the project's commercial operations dates, and also in our negotiations with Hawaiian Electric. In terms of a quick development update and construction update, at the 39 megawatt Mililani 1 project, we have already begun installing piles and racking, as well as medium voltage and DC underground cabling. So that installation is ongoing, as well as completed all the site grading and access roads at the site. So exciting to see that progress. At Clearway's 36 megawatt Waiawa project, site grading is 90% complete already. Pile installation is due to start next week. Racking deliveries are ongoing, and the battery storage yard and substation grading is also starting this week. So exciting to see that progress on the physical construction of the projects, as well as on the financing as our negotiations continue on the amendment. All of the permits are in hand for the projects, with the exception of the building permits for the project substations. So also positive on that front, and tracking on progress on schedule. In terms of the amendments themselves, also making good progress. We have a draft of the actual amendment going back and forth between us and Hawaiian Electric, and we are still planning to file the amendment by the target date of July 9th. The filing will provide a little bit more detail on the timeline for that, but similar to what Long Road just shared, we are also expecting to include a requested date for approval from the Commission of September 15th, in line with the need to also place deposits and whatnot and accelerate the delivery of long lead time equipment. We have finalized accelerated project schedules and are generally agreed with Hawaiian Electric on the key milestone dates that will be accelerating under the PPA amendment. including the acceptance testing and energization dates under the contract. So all positive progress there. One update to share in terms of the actual guaranteed dates that we're looking at for these projects. Mililani 1, we are still anticipating the 3-month acceleration to July 31st of 2022. For the Waiawa project, we are looking at a 2-month acceleration. That's due to a number of factors, mainly related to equipment deliveries and around the battery. So that brings us to a guaranteed commercial operations date of September 30th of next year for Waiawa, based on the current schedule. Other positive progress, we received a draft of the control system acceptance testing criteria and protocol. That's something we've sort of highlighted as important for having that confidence around a smooth commissioning of the project and making good progress there, having regular meetings with the system operations team at Hawaiian Electric, improving process and protocol there. And then finally, on the pricing terms of the amendment, we are hoping to narrow in on the final set of pricing terms and exchanging proposals on that front as well, and still within the range of what we had been communicating of the increase to the unit price of the projects. So our hope is to have a final set of documents for our lenders and financing parties to review by the end of this week, and allow about a week for that final sort of approval that's been happening in parallel as those parties are up to speed, and then filing the amendment with the commission by the July 9th target date. So with that, I will hand it over to Rebecca Dehoff Matsushima, Director of Renewable Acquisitions at Hawaiian Electric, and happy to answer questions after that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Good afternoon again, Chair and Commissioners. We are really excited to hear Clearway's progress, and we share Nicola and her team's excitement about how well the projects have been moving along through the construction phase. We are also pleased with the progress that we've made together to come to agreement on how to accelerate the project schedules and work together on an amendment to the PPA to document that. On our part, Hawaiian Electric, again, has looked for ways to help accelerate that schedule by shortening review time periods, instituting bi-weekly meetings with Clearway to work on any questions related to design and engineering and procurement. We also, as Nicola mentioned, were able to accelerate the creation of our control system acceptance test for these projects, which normally occurs at the end of, closer to the end of construction. So we've moved that up quite a bit in our time frame. So as Nicola mentioned, we do have a draft of the amendment that we're working on, and we are continuing to discuss the pricing proposal, but we do expect to be able to get that filed by July 9th. And so we're looking forward to moving forward with the acceleration. So I think that concludes our update, and like Nicola mentioned, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, I appreciate that update. And Nicola, just so I'm crystal clear, I understood, with the information you said, one project would be in, with the accelerated schedule, be in ahead of September 1st, and Waiawa would be September 30th?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, because that GCOD was December 1st and accelerating it by the 2 months. That's right.
Okay. And then what was the date on the Mililani one again? The accelerated date?
31st. Yeah, for Mililani 1, July 31st.
July. Okay. Thank you. I believe our side has no further questions. So thanks everyone for your informative and succinct updates. Let's move on to the next one on our list here, the Kupono solar project. I believe we have Jason Smith representing them, as well as Hawaiian Electric. And just so everyone's clear, this is a project that has not been approved. It still had been selected in the stage 2 RFP, and we're asking about updates on the progress with PPA negotiations. So just want to be clear, this is something that hasn't been brought to the commission or we've made a decision on, but we're tracking along with the progress of the whole suite of projects in stage 1, stage 2, and other related programs. So if we can please turn it over to the Jason Reyes and the Hawaiian Electric folks.
Chairman Griffin, hi, it's Jason Smith from Bright Canyon Energy. I think I'll kick us off unless.
Sorry, I got confused with the Jasons here on the screen. So
no, it's okay.
Apologize for that.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present before you today to give you an update on Kupono Solar. Bright Canyon is an energy developer located here in Phoenix and sister company to Arizona Public Service, the largest electric utility here in the state of Arizona. We understand the importance to the Commission and Hawaiian Electric of ensuring value and reliability to ratepayers, as well as conducting a robust, fair, and transparent resource procurement process given our 125 plus year roots as a regulated electric utility. We also understand the importance to the Navy of achieving its energy resiliency objectives at Pearl Harbor in support of our national defense, given our experience developing other energy infrastructure projects with the Navy. As you know, Kupono Solar is a proposed 42 megawatt solar and 168 megawatt hour battery storage project that was selected by Hawaiian Electric to the final award group as a part of the Stage 2 RFP process and would be located on the Navy land at Westlock Annex of Joint Base Pearl Harbor HECO. Because of our utility roots, we very much appreciate and believe in the value Kupono Solar can bring to customers, ratepayers, and the reliability and resiliency of the Oahu grid. And we stand ready to deliver Kupono Solar if the Commission, Hawaiian Electric, and the Navy desire the project. We believe Kupono Solar could be in operation in June 2023. To accomplish this, alignment of the Commission, Hawaiian Electric, and the Navy in terms of process and timeline are required. And to this end, we'd like to provide you a progress update in 4 areas today. First is the negotiations between Bright Canyon and the Navy's selected developer. Second is on the land at Navy's Westlock Annex. Third is on the interconnection study process with Hawaiian Electric. And fourth and finally is on actually building Kupono Solar. And I'll note before I get started, it's not yet been publicly announced who the Navy has selected as a part of their RFP process. So I will refer to this party as the quote unquote selected developer throughout my comments today. First, on the negotiations between Bright Canyon and the Navy's selected developer. On one hand, Bright Canyon was selected by Hawaiian Electric to negotiate a power purchase agreement for Kupono Solar through the competitive bidding process instituted by the Commission. On the other hand, the selected developer was competitively selected by the Navy to negotiate the land needed to site Kupono Solar under an enhanced use lease. So with both parties holding key elements of a successful project, the PPA and the land, Bright Canyon and the selected developer have now held several meetings discussing how we can work together to jointly develop Kupono Solar. These conversations are protected under an NDA between us, but I can say the conversations are progressing well. Since our last monthly update to the Commission, the selected developer has shared with the Navy our potential interest in working together, and the Navy has been supportive of these efforts. Bright Canyon and the selected developer have additional meetings planned to negotiate a joint development arrangement, and we will continue to keep the Commission updated through our monthly status letters, as well as at future status conferences if requested by the Commission. Second, regarding land at Navy's Westlock Annex, there are 2 requirements that we need to meet in this regard. First is under Hawaiian Electric Stage 2 PPA. This obviously requires site control to be satisfied prior to the execution of a PPA. But then secondly, the Navy has an obligation to satisfy NEPA before it can execute a fully effective lease. So to satisfy both of these requirements, Bright Canyon and the selected developer would secure site control through a lease option or similar agreement as a precursor to execution of a full lease. So this accomplishes 3 things. From a Navy perspective, this approach would allow time for the Navy to complete the required NEPA work before entering into a full lease agreement with the parties. From a Hawaiian Electric perspective, this would satisfy the Stage 2 PPA requirements to demonstrate land control and allow Kupono Solar to move forward with the execution of a PPA. And from a development perspective, this would provide the confidence to continue with development of Kupono Solar, including finalizing of the interconnection studies, performing more detailed engineering and design work, and placing deposits for long lead equipment. On the third topic regarding interconnection, we have been talking with Hawaiian Electric on how best to reinitiate the interconnection study process. And I'd like to hand it over to Becca, if I might, for an update on this front.
Sure, thanks, Jason. So as Jason noted, we've been in discussions with Kupono Solar to figure out how to move forward with the project and to see what we can do in parallel while site control issues are still being resolved. So we do believe that if Kupono Solar is able to resolve the site control issues, we can complete PPA negotiations fairly quickly. We only had a few minor remaining issues open in our negotiations on that front. So we believe that that could move forward very quickly. In the interim, we've proposed recommencing the IRS process, which has been on pause, to allow that to start moving forward. And we believe that it'll take approximately 8 months once we get started, which is in line with the time frame that the other stage 2 projects went through to complete their IRS. And that would involve, and that assumes that the models that were provided remain the same models, and those have already gone through model checkout, and so we will be able to just start the studies. And so that process would involve updating the project schedule based on the new timelines for the project, completing the system impact study, finalizing the facility study, and then moving forward. And a lot of those steps can happen concurrently, but the whole overall process, we believe, will take about 8 months. So if BC were to give us the green light to move forward with the IRS by August, we think we could finish that up in April of 2022. And then in the interim, we'll continue to work with Kupono Solar on other things that might be able to be accomplished concurrently. For example, completing the PPA negotiations, going through the PPA approval process, providing Kupono Solar the information they need to begin long lead item procurement, those types of things that can occur concurrently with that 8-month IRS process. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to you, Jason, to kind of wrap up and explain how long it would take from completion of the IRS to get the project in the ground.
Sure, thanks, Becca. So on the fourth topic of actually building Kupono Solar, Bright Canyon and a selected developer are prepared to resume engineering and procurement work as soon as a deal is reached between the two of us and with the Navy. And then obviously the PPA with Hawaiian Electric is substantially finalized. And then, as Becca mentioned, as the system impact study and final facility studies are being finalized, the final specifications of the long lead equipment that we will need to order will become known, and then we can move forward. Some of the other developers have mentioned on the in the meeting here today on ordering the long lead time equipment that'll help achieve ultimate commercial operation of the facility. So from the time of ordering that long lead time equipment, our project plan that we've been working on basically contemplates completing Kupono Solar in 16 to 18 months that then supports the June of 2023 delivery timeframe that we talked about at the outset of the meeting here today. So in conclusion, we appreciate the Commission giving us time to explore ways to move Kupono Solar forward. With the time you all have provided us, I'm happy to report negotiations have progressed. We've identified ways to secure land control in a manner that's consistent with both Hawaiian Electric and the Navy's processes. And we've identified with Hawaiian Electric a timely interconnection process that will support delivery of Kupono Solar. So with that, we look forward to further engaging with the Commission, Hawaiian Electric, and the Navy, and the selected developer in this regard. Becca and I are happy to answer any questions the Commission might have.
Thank you both for your updates as well. And I'm going to turn, we have, I think, a few questions on our side. First, our Chief of Policy and Research, Dave Parsons, I believe, has a question.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about the timeline, the June 2023 timeline. Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Sort of what assumptions are baked into that, particularly when are you assuming that a PPA would be submitted to the Commission for approval to meet that June date?
Yeah, sure. So we would plan at the moment to submit basically in August of this year. We would look to reinitiate the interconnection process. So giving ourselves next month or two to finalize negotiations between the selected developer and ourselves, as well as working with the Navy. And then in September, be in a position to submit a PPA to the commission for consideration. And then going forward from there, we would be, moving the interconnection process forward toward the April 2022 timing to finalize the facility study that Becca mentioned in her comments. As that study is being finalized, we'll obviously learn the specs that we need to order the long lead time equipment that will then be, one of the key critical path items to achieving a June 2023 in-service date.
Great, thank you.
Okay, but Commissioner Sunstein, I believe, has some clarifying questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to make sure. So thanks for the timeline. That was one of my questions as well. But I did hear, Rebecca, I think you said that some of this is also contingent upon the models and I guess the information already provided. So if that does that add time if we have to go back and forth again on like any modeling or?
Yeah, so if the project models were to change, if any of the major equipment that we study in the models were to change, then we would have to go through the model checkout process again. So those timelines assume that model checkout process has been completed. And I see Jason just popped on, so he can probably give a better understanding of the timeline if we were to have to go back through model checkout.
Yeah, Becca's correct. If we have to recheck the models, it'll probably add about 1 more month to the schedule in case there's any back and forth. Yeah.
Okay. And on another topic, is I assume someone of you, either Bright Canyon or Hawaiian Electric, has been talking with the Navy. I mean, it's not like through the selected lessee for the land. It's like you folks are also talking to the Navy to make sure all of this kind of happens, hopefully.
Yes, we've had conversations with the Navy. We've explained to them the RFP process, how the selected bidder, Kupono Solar, was selected, the importance of, maintaining that process and having the site control in hand. So we've had those conversations with the Navy for the last, basically since selection of the project.
Okay.
And Commissioner, so Gian, I would add to that from a Bright Canyon perspective, we initially offered to the Navy to send our contact information to the selected developer. They have, put us in touch, and we began discussions and negotiations in early May between the two of us after the Navy coordinated our introduction. And then we've also been coordinating with the Navy on the monthly updates that we've been providing to the Commission, as well as obviously the selected developer themselves engaging with the Navy directly. So I think between Becca's comments on Hawaiian Electric's dialogue with them and the dialogue that we've had in those two different manners has definitely been engagement with the Navy.
Okay.
And Commissioner Ascension, just to add to what Rebecca said, that we're not part of the Navy's procurement process and their RFP, right? They have their own procedures, but they recently, NAVFAC recently reached out to us. Gosh, what is it, about 3 weeks ago or so, to kind of bring us up to speed on their process and where they're at. So there's been discussions, at least one meeting that I know of where we've had discussions post of their process.
Okay. And maybe just more for my education, Jason, maybe you can answer this. Right, I understand the part about having a more, what I'll call an interim lease, agreement, so that you guys can get control of land. But just, in your experience, how long would the full NEPA take to get to the full lease?
Yeah, so I think the good news here is that there's been prior NEPA work done in and around the West Loch Annex. It actually supported the existing solar project that is at the West Loch Annex that Hawaiian Electric built a number of years ago. And so that all of that NEPA work at that point in time concluded that it's compatible with solar and battery storage in that area and development of a project along those lines. So, you know, our belief is NEPA could be completed in a time frame that would support the June 2023 in-service date we talked about here today.
Okay.
We'll obviously need to work through that. You know, Navy will be the lead from a NEPA perspective, so we'll need to, you know, coordinate that obviously with the Navy as we move forward.
Okay. And that's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave and Commissioner. You guys covered my questions. So I want to thank Jason and Rebecca. Again, thanks for the update and your participation today. I don't think we have anything further for, at least for Jason on this. We'll see. Got other updates for Rebecca possibly. But with that, let's move on. Next up in the agenda here is Brian Kalaw and Hawaii Energy. I believe he does have a presentation for us. Brian, are you running that from your computer?
Yes, let me go ahead and bring that up.
Thanks for joining us. And thanks for making your debut here in the status conferences. Just as an overview, we have, you know, reached out for a variety of different measures to address these plant retirements, including, you know, working with our program manager, Hawaii Energy, here for how we can refocus and allocate some of the resources that go to this program to addressing the plant retirement. So with that, Brian, you can go forward.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners, as well, for this opportunity to share a little bit more about the Hawaii Energy Program's plans as it relates to the AES coal plant retirement. We also want to acknowledge the contributions of all the stakeholders who have been actively, you know, working on this critical issue. We've been in dialogue with many of them as we start to put forward our planning to be able to try and address the situation from our perspective. I'd also like to take the opportunity to mention that, you know, there have been conversations in the past really questioning the importance of energy efficiency, particularly the valuation of it during the daytime periods when it's coincident with the solar peak. But I think the conversation today really highlights the importance of energy efficiency and not only reducing customers' bills at any time of the day, but also its contribution to peak demand reduction. When efficiency is paired with renewable energy and energy storage, even greater benefits can occur for peak shifting and customer bill reduction. To begin, I wanted to provide a brief overview of our planning efforts as it's related to the past 5 months. For context, we're currently in the middle of implementation of year 2, currently our program year 20 of our original triennial plan. Of course, COVID recovery efforts coupled with reduced public benefits fee surcharge collections being reduced, we had to modify our original plans quite significantly, but the programs are on track to achieve the majority of the goals for this year. Even prior to the call for action with the emergency demand response efforts, Hawaii Energy had kicked off another round of planning for the final year of our triennial period, which is PY21, really to ensure that our efforts were properly aligned with changing conditions and also in alignment with the intentions of the LMI Energy Efficiency Performance Incentive Mechanism, which was established as part of the performance-based regulation decision and order. These planning efforts have ramped up quite significantly in March with the calls for ideas related to the AES plant retirement. While Hawaii Energy is not an active participant in the DER docket proceedings, our team has been in communication with many of you, and we've been closely following the parties' proposals in an effort to really propose complementary offers and to minimize duplication. So these planning efforts were not only focused on what was supposed to be the final year of our triennial period, PY21, but now is also inclusive of a 4th year, program year 22, which has been added to minimize any disruptions that might have been caused due to the end of the triennial performance period. As per the Commission's guidance, our team has focused on identifying opportunities to advance and expedite demand-side actions for increased impact. On April 16th, we filed our first proposal for PY 21-22, and I've been working closely with the Commission and the Energy Efficiency Manager to refine Program Year 22 specifically to increase peak demand reduction during the critical 2022-2023 period. Traditionally, our Hawaii Energy Program accomplishments have been really highlighted the progress towards our EAPS goals, or our kWh or megawatt hour savings. What may not be as broadly recognized is the program's impact to permanent load reduction. So you can see here on this slide, the overall megawatt reduction has been achieved over the last 5 years, with Oahu accounting for about 75% of that reduction. As noted in the Commission's decision order 37715, docket 2021-24, energy efficiency is a cost-effective resource, and the Hawaii Energy Program has consistently delivered on program targets and goals. And so really, when we back that up and looked at across utilities across the country, many utilities are using efficiency programs to reduce peak demand across the grid, as efficiency continues to be a cost-effective option for meeting power needs. The program's success has also meant that it becomes more challenging for us to acquire the additional capacity reductions, meaning we really have to dig deeper and refine our program offerings to drive these actions. Fortunately, refining our portfolio is not an unfamiliar task, really in the wake of a global pandemic. As part of our COVID recovery efforts, we rolled out a number of new initiatives that gave us a solid foundation to work from. And these programs have had to be really simple and enticing to drive early adoption. And this is something that we learned, particularly over the past 18 months. We successfully used limited time increased incentives and targeted these incentives at specific sectors to make sure that they are the most impactful. Another important aspect of increasing adoption is leveraging our Clean Energy Ally Network to be a force multiplier in informing customers of our programs. Just in the last year, Hawaii Energy has provided a number of co-funded marketing and advertising efforts, as well as events with our allies that have successfully engaged customers. So here, this slide really shows kind of our core tenets, how we approach the planning for our PY 21-22 planning. We really focused on a portfolio approach for capacity reductions, and I really wanted to highlight as well that this was within our existing budget. While we continued the prioritization of affordability and accessibility and customer bill savings across the residential and commercial portfolio. The portfolio we're proposing going forward not only brings kW reductions, but also continues to deliver kilowatt hour savings needed to attain EAPS. We have also reintroduced our energy optimization initiatives. Those were removed last year due to the budget reductions from reduced collections. So for the traditional energy efficiency programs in our commercial portfolio, we're really going to be leveraging our understanding of the market and customers through our existing channels and networks, so we're able to drive greater reduction. This draws on the success of that past programming and relationships. Some of what we'll be doing is utilizing enhanced customer engagement and incentive strategies implemented for COVID recovery efforts, and again, targeting large commercial customers with the highest demand reduction potential. This includes a customized sector and technology-based approach to try and really maximize the kW impact that we can have. The residential portfolio also includes increased investment in heat pump water heating, and at the direction of the Commission, we have removed the home energy reports in favor of other incentives that can be driving load reducing technologies. As part of the reinvestment in our energy optimization initiatives in PY21, we'll be significantly increasing our budget and emphasis on grid interactive technologies that can be layered onto traditional energy efficiency and provide additional capacity for utility demand response programs. We see some real potential with the fast DR expansion and are continuing discussions with Hawaiian Electric on how we can refine our qualifying criteria to drive enrollment. Recognizing that emergency demand response proposals are largely targeted at residential customers, we had to shift our programming again as well in most recently over the past month. And part of what we'll be doing is now really driving our storage incentives towards the commercial sector. We're trying to complement the EDR proposals submitted by the parties, and now that the program's been implemented, we're trying to reduce and minimize duplication. And as I showed earlier, we're trying to do that real time. We're trying to be flexible with our programming, and we'll continue to do so as not only the landscape becomes clearer, but really as we understand what customer adoption will be like, particularly in the commercial sector for energy storage. We'll be targeting customers with a high kW demand in the 5 to 9 p.m. period that obviously aligns with the system peak. We think that's critical that their customers' billing demand reduction aligns so that the savings align and ultimately the storage is operated optimally for both the customer and the grid. Having learned more of the details of the EDR program, we will be targeting those commercial customers who may be apprehensive to sign up for a 10-year commitment. We've found through our experience, oftentimes large customers are reticent, or the approval process can be relatively lengthy if there's uncertainty coupled with a long-term commitment. So it's really our intent to utilize our incentives to bring customers along who might not have signed up for the EDR program otherwise. We also recognize that our investment and the incentives we're putting forward towards storage right now at this time is foundational. And while we're only capturing the capacity value, just by deploying more storage, we believe there's the opportunity to utilize these resources in the future for additional value stacking opportunities. So this slide illustrates our estimated impact from the PY 21 and 22 programs as currently proposed. Of these, approximately 70% of the savings is coming from the commercial sector, with a little over a megawatt coming directly from the energy optimization initiatives, DR Ready and commercial energy storage in PY 22. The portfolio also reflects the removal of all A-lamp LEDs from the residential portfolio due to codes and standards, which equates to a 3 megawatt reduction from the portfolio. So you can see that what we have here is really we've had to compensate for that loss through the measures that I've covered through this presentation. And while this comes at a little bit of a higher cost, it still remains the most cost-effective resource, especially from a portfolio perspective. So with that, I just wanted to thank the Commission for the opportunity to share a little bit more about our upcoming programming for the next 2 years and welcome any questions you have.
Thanks, Brian. I've checked. No questions from the Commission at this point. Thanks again for your participation. And I mean, speaking to your slide, number 2 shows the flexibility and the responsiveness the program has had to meet the changing needs that we've had in the past year and a half. So I want to thank you and the team for that, and look forward on implementing these programs in the next 2 years. So with that, nothing further for now. Thanks, Brian. Let's move to the next up on the agenda is the team from AES, and I do believe Scott Glenn was going to give some introduction here, and then we'll move to the team from AES.
Aloha, Chair. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak about this. Before AES and Hawaiian Electric speak about the letter, I just wanted to share some background information and context for participants here and the public watching. I would like to just affirm the opening statement in the letter that I did in fact reach out to AES and ask them to look into this question. This started when the Commission opened this docket and put out the call for ideas to ensure a timely retirement of the coal plant. I reached out to AES because I wanted to understand what is going to happen to the coal plant itself in this discussion. We've mainly been focused on the renewable energy projects, and developing those and the replacement, but I want to understand what was going away and what aspects of it might still be valuable to the conversation that we're having about Hawaii's renewable energy future. And while we're looking at the transition to building out the stage 1 and stage 2 projects, I wanted just to see, is there a role here? And I'd also just like to be clear that throughout this whole discussion, it started with, is there something this plant could be used for? Biomass was identified as an option. And at that point, AES made it very clear that biomass is not their preferred renewable energy technology. But if we were going to pursue this idea of, could we still have value from this plant, that would likely be the resource that would make sense for it. Partly too, this coal plant is located in Campbell Industrial Park. It's an existing industrial area. It's right next door to H Power. It's just down the street from Kailua Partners. It sits between our 2 refineries. It's an existing defined footprint in an industrial area. And just speaking of footprint, with the coal that it uses, the coal comes from Indonesia mainly. That coal is extracted from open pit mining that used to be rainforests. The coal plant still has a lot of destruction that happens around it, and local deforestation, water contamination, heavy metals. All of these things are occurring around the coal extraction in Indonesia that we rely on. With the end of the contract for AES to provide this power, my understanding is that the facility will be dismantled and the property returned to the landowner minus the coal plant. And so in the context of learning this, here in Hawaii, we're also having the same discussion about using our agricultural land for solar. And we're having a discussion about how much of our limited land do we allocate to renewable energy. And I thought, well, let's understand this facility. Let's see what it means if we were to say biomass would be an option, both in the near term to help us get through this reliability question and provide an alternative source of renewable power, renewable as defined by statute generation, for a way to help us meet our goals. But also looking medium term, Chair, in the recent KES decision, YL 3 and 4 were identified for financial retirement. And so understanding that there's a cadence coming up, our discussion today has been about the coal plant itself. But if we're going to look at the larger picture of retiring fossil fuel generating units around Oahu, we're looking at retiring one every couple of years. And so there's a rhythm, there's a cadence that I think we need to look to as a state, as a county, as private sector, on making this transition in kind of chunks of generating units. And the presentation like Brian just gave us can show us how we can really help smooth out that curve. We also need some really large chunks to be brought on board. And from that perspective, I thought it was valuable to understand the potential of biomass at the plant. And I encouraged AES and Hawaiian Electric to talk, and then to present to the PUC for your consideration what the steps would be if this were an option that were on the table to pursue. And so I think I'll stop there, but just wanted to provide that context for everyone so that this, while it might be coming out of the blue for a lot of folks, it's ultimately tied to the coal plant transition itself and our overall direction for our 2045 goals. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Scott. Maybe I'll turn it over to Sandra. Are you going to be presenting? Okay.
I can
give us
start.
some more. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Scott. Thank you, Chair. Aloha, everyone. My name is Sandra Larson. I'm the Hawaii Market Business Leader for AES. I'm here with my colleague, John Bigaball, who is the President and COO of AES Hawaii. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for the opportunity to discuss this proposal today. I'd also like to thank Scott Glenn, Chief Energy Officer, for reaching out to AES regarding the feasibility of converting our plant to operate using renewable biomass. AES and Hawaiian Electric had previously explored a biomass option in 2018, and we revisited this conversion option at the request of Mr. Glenn. We're willing to explore this more fully should the Commission and the State Energy Office want to rely less on fossil fuel oil to enhance system reliability, enhance grid services, and lower costs to customers during the transition. So at the request of Mr. Glenn and the Commission's invitation for comment, we're putting forward this option for consideration. At AES, we're accelerating the future of energy together with our customers, communities, and stakeholders. We're proud to be a leader of renewable deployment in Hawaii and in 14 countries around the world. We share Hawaii's vision for a 100% renewable energy future. And for almost 30 years now, we've been providing affordable, reliable energy to serve nearly 20% of Oahu's energy needs with our Barbers Point facility. We're actively supporting Hawaii's transition to 100% renewable energy with renewable projects across the Hawaiian Islands. They total over 200 megawatts of solar plus storage, wind resources that are either in operation or under contract with Hawaiian Electric. So our purpose at AES is really very aligned with that of Hawaii. We're committed to accelerating and achieving a carbon-free energy future, which is why ensuring grid reliability and a seamless, cost-effective transition is really so important for Hawaii as it is for AES. This transition could be adversely impacted unless resiliency, reliability, and affordability are maintained. You know, Hawaii has been a US and a world leader in advancing climate change policies and renewable energy goals. But as the August and September 2020 rolling blackouts in California and the recent Texas blackouts teach us, we all have to take care to ensure resiliency and reliability as we undergo this energy transition. And with Hawaii having some of the highest electric rates in the US, we also have to be thoughtful about how this is going to impact customers and take steps to mitigate financial impacts. So with that, I'll turn it over to John now, who's going to provide a summary of the biomass conversion option.
Thank you, Sandra, and aloha, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the AES proposal to convert the Barbers Point plant to 100% renewable biomass. As we consider options for Oahu to successfully transition to 100% renewable energy, one way to do so is use the existing infrastructure at the Barbers Point facility to produce electricity from renewable biomass until enough alternative renewable energy resources can be successfully installed. Depending on the length of time biomass would be used and the start date, AES would consider different conversion options and different PPA terms. We expect such a biomass project could support Oahu's needs for a successful energy transition and at a lower cost to customers. It is important to note that a conversion is not an all or nothing for a lengthy period. We can tailor the start date and duration to best serve the energy and grid service needs of the island. We estimate, based on a feasibility study completed in 2018, that the all-in cost to operate on biomass is between 18 and 20 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on a variety of factors. I would like to point out that there was a typo in our letter, and the decimal place in the price should not be there. We apologize for any confusion this may have caused. We are working with our engineering firm and believe we can deliver a biomass option as early as Q1 2023. However, to do so, AES would need to start on several key items now, including engineering and EPC costs, environmental permit modifications, procurement of certified sustainable biomass, establishing all necessary commercial arrangements to maintain safe, efficient, and reliable operations, construction of necessary modifications, and testing. This option leverages the existing infrastructure of the Barbers Point plant, minimizing interconnection costs and associated timeline, while also minimizing the use of scarce available land for renewable resources. We can provide a flexible term, anywhere between 2 and 20 years or more. For example, as short as 2 years to aid in the transition of the stage 1 and 2 projects, or 10 years until the standalone battery can be substantially filled with renewable energy, or 20 years to help with the transition to 100% renewable energy, depending on the needs and desire of the state. For AES to consider such an undertaking, we would need to amend the PPA and obtain the necessary permits for construction and operations. But then we could procure necessary long lead time items to reach COD in 16 months from notice to proceed. The plant would provide 180 megawatts of firm capacity, energy, and grid services. Conversion of the plant to operate on biomass could provide meaningful benefits for the state, including a dispatchable renewable energy resource intended to provide capacity and renewable energy, reducing the reliance on fossil fuel oil, enhance system resiliency and reliability, provide grid services, and lower costs to customers when compared to the use of fuel oil. It also leverages the existing infrastructure of the Barbers Point plant, including the existing interconnection facilities. Minimizes the use of land on Oahu for renewable resources, and adds to the portfolio a renewable energy resource capable of continuous operations for long periods of time. The biomass conversion option would require a waiver from the competitive bidding framework to undertake the capital investments and improvements necessary for biomass use. Going through a multi-year competitive bid process is not feasible under these time-sensitive circumstances. In order to minimize the operational costs of a biomass conversion and maintain availability of the operational staff to support such an option, should the Commission and the State Energy Office be interested, we suggest that the Commission direct Hawaiian Electric to begin negotiations for the biomass conversion, which could allow the facility to operate on coal for up to 4 months to enable a safe and reliable transition without a prolonged interruption to service. This extension would provide Oahu customers with lower cost energy, as well as ensure that the transition to biomass can be done with minimal operational cost. We estimate this period could save Oahu customers about $2 million per month, or about $8 million or more. It would support reliability and the uncertainty surrounding the GCOD of the standalone battery project. It would minimize operational costs and help to retain the existing operational staff at the plant, and allow for additional flexibility in generation outage planning and maintenance. At this stage, if there is a desire by the state to explore biomass further, AES is willing to perform the engineering work to confirm pricing for the conversion and start the permitting process. We can also start negotiations with Hawaiian Electric for a PPA. All commercial arrangements would obviously be condition precedent on a PUC approval and approval of all necessary permits. A notice to proceed to start procurement and construction would be issued once these approvals have been obtained. To be clear, to proceed, we are looking for an expression of interest to evaluate the conversion at the expected all-in cost of 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. If this option is desired, AES stands ready to allocate resources and start the project immediately. And we will work with Hawaii to tailor the best solution for this transition, which could be short, medium, or long-term, and has benefits to customers. Once again, I want to thank the Commission for this opportunity to discuss this option, as well as Mr. Glenn for reaching out to AES. Now I'll turn it back over to Sandra.
So in closing, we just want to reiterate that our purpose at AES is very much aligned with that of Hawaii. We're fully committed to supporting the state in a successful transition, but we have to navigate this transition to ensure that customers are provided essential utility services in a safe, reliable, economical, and environmentally sound manner. We offer this biomass conversion option in the spirit of achieving these goals for Oahu. We're ready and willing to discuss this more fully and to undertake an assessment should there be support for this. We emphasize, though, that time is short, and we respectfully do request that any decision on whether to proceed with an evaluation be made within 30 days, if possible. And again, we really, really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and we welcome any questions from anyone.
Let's see, I think it's like each commissioner has a question. So let's start with Commissioner Sunstein.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sandra and your team for providing this presentation. I just had a couple of questions. So what we're looking at is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, 180 megawatt biomass producing or biomass generated energy, right? That's the proposal here. And all of that is all-in cost of 18 to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. Correct?
Yes, Commissioner. I'm
Okay.
sorry. That's correct.
Okay, so then, and maybe you guys haven't gotten through this yet because, right, what you're looking for here is some commitment by someone to take it further, right? And I'm not sure if the commission is the one to actually make that commitment right now. So I'll
Yeah.
put it into that context. But I'm looking at, right, Oahu, we have some ag going on, but not a lot. Where's the feedstock to generate 180 megawatts?
Sure. I'll answer that. So thank you for the question. So what we're looking at is a sustainable biomass. It would be certified and most likely come out of Western Canada. It would be biomass pellets.
Okay. And my only other thing, and maybe this is something, the landowner, I believe, is the state of Hawaii, and it's the DOT harbors. So what's the impact to them, right? Because they also have plans for Barbers Point for the harbor facilities. And I seem to remember at one point they had plans, right, for the day that AES coal shuts down and the land is reverted back to them. So any indication of, or anyone check with DOT harbors on this?
So I'm not sure what you're referring to, DOT harbors, but the plant does have control of the property for couple decades.
Okay. But that's under the AES coal facility.
It's under, I believe it's, I don't know the legal entity. I believe it's under AES Hawaii.
Okay, no, but for the use of, right, the use on the land would be a coal plant.
I'm not sure if it specifies in the lease.
Okay.
We've just recently extended that lease. So, okay.
Yeah, I think with the comment that, like I said earlier, I don't think it's the commission's saying yes or no, or go or not go. It's not us to make that decision, right? I think it's other people in this room or in this meeting that needs to make that commitment, right? And yes, it does come with some risks to AES Hawaii to go forward, right? But I don't think, if you're looking for an answer from us, I don't think it's going to come from the commission.
Yeah, and if I may, I don't think we're asking for a yes or no. I think we're asking for an expression of interest. Is this something that would be seriously considered? Because obviously, to get to that point, we would have to do the engineering work and firm up the EPC pricing. That undertaking will cost significant amount of money, not the amount to do the conversion. But you know, we're probably, if there's not an interest, then we probably shouldn't pursue it, right? So that's really what we're asking for is an expression of interest. Does this work for a while?
Okay. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Potter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation or your discussion today. We appreciate everyone bringing these opportunities to the table. So it's good to hear that Scott has reached out to you and asked for additional information. Commissioner Ascension did ask my question about feedstock. So thank you for the clarification of the pellets coming from Canada. That's helpful. And I think that the only question I have left is, you do have a bullet point on here that says minimize biomass conversion costs by continued operation during construction. So I'm assuming that that conversion cost minimization, if you will, would be to AES and not to the ratepayer. It would actually be, is that correct?
That's not necessarily correct. So the cost of carrying the plant without any revenues is going to be significant to maintain the staff, right? So ultimately, that would translate into the PPA pricing. So if the plant has to be carried for a number of months, that would increase the cost of electricity. So it's not necessarily a savings to AES. It gets translated into the power purchase price.
Okay, I got you. So we would actually continue operating the coal plant for additional 3 to 4 months while the conversion took place. Is that correct?
Well, that's what we're thinking. If the facility was if the folks of Hawaii wanted it in Q1 of 2023, then the ideal would be to operate the plant through December, which is allowed under the law, and then we would shut down in December, and then we would start the tie-ins and the conversions and have an outage, and then bring it back up in March.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Can you also clarify when you said you extended the lease on the property, in terms of just relating back to Commissioner Asunction's, what was that? What was that about? In terms of what was the objective of extending that lease for that property?
Sure. So the lease was extended several years ago, and the thought process, I think it was to install a large standalone battery.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it wasn't recent being this is a 30-year plant, so it was about, I think, 3 years ago maybe it was extended for a battery storage system.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification. I appreciate that, Jay. Great. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, both commissioners. I have some follow-up questions related to things you asked and a couple other topics. So I think actually first I'd like to talk to Hawaiian Electric. We haven't heard yet on their perspective on this proposal, and I have one starting question. It seems to me, right, this seems to flip the economics of what you would consider what traditionally would be a baseload plant on its head. And what I mean by that is, right, the traditional view is you have a high capital cost, long-lived asset, low operating costs, not ignoring the externality, the environmental effects of the coal, but the cost to run it it's your least expensive operating cost on the whole system. And so that provides the basis to run it, try and maximize the capacity. Now we're going to take something that I think the operating cost was around 3 cents. This proposal is 18 to 20 cents. And so that seems to me you would want to try and minimize its use and only have the capacity available when you absolutely need it. And it seems like there may be operational constraints on the plant to do that as a older steam unit. And so I guess asking Hawaiian Electric, how would, right, this plant has run as a full-on baseload unit for decades, and this proposal would basically flip that. So how would you think about, if this were to go forward, how does that enter into the operational perspective? And then two, it would also seem like we're taking ourselves in the wrong direction, making the grid less flexible rather than greater flexibility that we're going to need. So if this was to go forward, how would you use this and still continue to minimize the cost of your electric grid is, I guess, my fundamental question.
Hello, Chair Griffin, Commissioners, Scott C. Hawaiian Electric, and I'll invite Colton Ching to add in here as well. Both of us harken back to sometimes in our careers where we are head of our system operation areas here on Oahu. You framed it correctly, Chair. Traditionally, when you have baseload generation, it is baseload because it's providing some of the most economic energy on the system. And of course, being a firm generator in this case, it's providing capacity value as well. And for those reasons, that's why historically, when you have baseload generation, it's baseload. You want to keep it running, maximize its output, keep it steady as you can. And then, of course, as you go down the generation stack, once you get to more expensive options, then you start to cycle units, or they have more load carrying, load following capabilities. And then, of course, you get to the most expensive units, which will be your peaking units. So, all in, you're correct. I think it's the energy component of the AES plant that right now is running about on the order of like the 3 cents per kilowatt hour. But when you calculate in also the capacity value of the payments that we're providing to AES, I think all in, it's roughly, I think in 2018, it was a little bit more than 10 cents somewhere between 10 and 11 cents per kilowatt hour all in. So in this case, yes, it would be a pretty sizable jump in cost from that. You know, and I'm assuming well, let me clarify for one thing. We don't actually have a specific proposal from AES yet. I think the way AES described this, you know, is it's more of a conceptual, and in order to develop a more detailed proposal, that's what they're seeking some input here. So I'm assuming though that the 18 to 20% per kWh is based on continued baseload operation of this plant. Again, maybe I shouldn't put that assumption out there. I don't know for sure. In which case, you're exactly right, Chair. It does change pretty significantly how we think of our baseload generation. So if getting to your second part of your question, if we're operating this unit baseload at 180 megawatts, we would really have to go back essentially and really consider how does this, you know, operate within the portfolio of generation resources on the island, right? And that would include the new stage 1, stage 2 projects, you know, all of the different resources that we're currently working to procure. So we don't know how, you know, from an operations flexibility perspective, I think what I can tell you is that our current plans are, you know, based on the retirement of the AES coal unit, which as 180 megawatts is our largest, you know, the largest single generating unit on the system. So our current plans, I believe, were baked around having a lower, largest unit on the system, down on the 135 megawatt size. So retaining a 180 megawatt unit on our system would be, again, quite different from what our current resource plans have and what our current system operation modeling has. So hopefully I answered your questions, Chair.
Let me just sorry, John, let me just interject by this. I forgot to say at the outset. I do want to thank John, Sandra, and Scott Glenn. I mean, you guys, I take it this wasn't your first your first preference option either. You answered our call. So I want to be clear about that. And so we're not, we're talking about it in that context. We're going to talk about it. We're talking about it in the context that, you know, we're still not clear how we're going to get through next September and next fall. We're going to talk about that some more coming up. And so I do want to thank you folks for bringing this forward in that spirit. And so please don't take the comments here out of that light. And so, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I do just want to add, you're right, Chair, is that this is typically a base loaded unit, but going forward, this is very, you know, low capex, right? To do the conversion, the energy price would be higher. And then, you know, to Scott's point, you know, the way this plant has been operated as a base loaded unit for almost 30 years. That's because the variable cost is so low. But this plant is actually capable, in its current design, it's capable of going from about 62 megawatts to 180 megawatts, and that's in 2 boiler operation. So we could actually drop a boiler. This is what the study would determine. So we can drop a boiler and run in single boiler operation. We should be able to push that minimum generation down to about half. So I don't think it's, you know, it's not a 180 megawatt take it all. We want to make this, we realize that burning biomass will be more from an energy perspective. And so we want to make it much more flexible, which we believe the existing design can accommodate.
Okay, so that gets at some of my, but has it operated, at least from how I view the data we collect? I mean, just from a kind of qualitative standpoint, at these costs, you would want it down at the minimum, at least a lot of the time, and maybe some increase in the evening, and then during peak periods, you know, we'd be looking for the 180, possibly the full capacity output. So,
right,
you know, are you confident that several months of the year that would be operating at its minimum and still be able to come back up as when called upon?
We are comfortable with that. And the one thing that I should point out is the all-in cost that we provided assumes certain dispatch factors. It would dispatch off the fuel price only, which is currently about the price of oil, maybe a little less, when you look at energy only.
Okay, so that we're hoping to go lower, I think is the point here.
I no, I agree.
The other, okay, I guess one other clarifying question, and is John, you talked about several months of savings. I think at a total of $8 million, and just so I'm clear, that savings was based on the several month continuing under coal operations, not the conversion, right?
That's right. That's continuing the operations, and it's the difference between the all-in cost of the coal plant versus the marginal cost of oil. Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, so that my next series of questions really is follow up to comment from Commissioner Asuncion. The idea that the commission needs to make this call in the next 30 days, on top of, right, we heard the other proposals all need a quick turnaround from the commission. I'll just be blunt. It's very frustrating that, this situation is created by delays. And we don't still have a clear picture on what we'll get through next year. We're going to talk about differing perspectives between what HNEI says and what Hawaiian Electric has given to us. But Scott Sue, it seems to me that, we need a call from you, whether you think this is your company needs to be very clear and say whether this is necessary or not.
Well, Chair Griffin, to the answer to that, I would say it's not necessary to extend.
And you're ready to stand behind that come next September if we're not prepared?
Well, Chair Griffin, that's the reason why we've been in this docket for the number of months we've been. And I would just flag, I give full credit to the commission for bringing this together and, implementing another number of additional options, including the 50 megawatt emergency DER, demand response. And as we've been looking at also the latest in terms of our resource plans, our generation unit maintenance schedules, as again, working with the commission on the approval of the KES project, that's why we have confidence that actually we will be able to cover load at the retirement of the AES coal plant. So I think the way that I'm trying to express it, Chair, is that all of the efforts of this docket, all the parties, including all of the efforts of the Powering Past Coal Task Force, are starting to stack up. Yes, there are still some areas where we're trying to shave a few months here and there off. But, and then to your point, it really does get into some of the specifics of the modeling assumptions between HNEI versus Hawaiian Electric. We feel like the plan has enough meat to it, so that if you ask me how I feel about the need to extend the AES coal past September 2022, I will tell you we don't need to.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. I do want to thank all of you again. This was brought in the spirit of answering our call. We're trying to run all options to ground, and we need everyone's help in that. So I want to thank the AES team. I want to thank Scott, and Scott, I want to thank you for your direct answer.
And Chair, I'm sorry, I would also like to add my thanks to the AES team as well as Scott Glenn, because I think it's still a valid consideration in terms of what other types of resources, firm renewable energy resources can we bring into this system. I think resource diversity is a very critical need. So I do also want to acknowledge my thanks as well.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think we're going to take a little break because we've got a good presentation coming up from the HNEI team. I think a lot of important material to discuss. So let's take a 10-minute break. We're going to return at 2:40 on my watch. So thanks, everyone. hope to see you after the break. Appreciate it. Maybe call to see if folks can start filtering back in, so we can try and start up as promptly at 2:40 as possible. Next up, we have Rick Rochlow and Derek Stenslick from HNAI and TELUS Energy.
Jay, just to do a sound check, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
How about Rick? Oh, I caught him eating. Oh, I think he's on mute too. Oh, there he is.
Okay, I'm off mute now. Hope that's better.
Looking at Dave, how are we doing with the YouTube stream?
We're good. We're ready to go.
Okay, so next up we have a presentation from HNEI providing their updated analysis on the reliability of the Oahu system. So thanks to Rick and Derek, and I'll let you guys take it from here.
Okay, and I'm gonna pass this to Derek. I'm just gonna make a couple of real quick comments that if someone goes back and looks at our previous briefing, I think in March, there may have been some intermediate results since then. The analysis has really stayed very similar. There may be some slight differences, and partly that's because the number of samples that have been run has increased significantly to give us better fidelity in the monthly results, which we have found to be very important. So I wanted to point that out, and it's not really large differences, but there could be some small differences. Another, just going forward, is we do have data at, I'll call it generic values of PV battery installation at different times. So as schedules change, it really is quite easy for us. It's not so easy as just moving the curve left or right because every month is different, but it is relatively easy to provide an ongoing update without the need to go back and redo the runs and chewing up a lot of computer time. So I wanted to put that out there that as we see these changes that all look very positive occurring, it's quite easy to go back and keep a very timely update of what that means in terms of what Derek is now going to present. Derek, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Rick. And really valid point. So I think just want to stress that the analytical results, the runs, not changed from what we shared at the last status conference a few months ago. We did, as Rick mentioned, we increased the sample size. I think originally we were looking at 250 randomly generated years of simulation for every case we looked at. We increased that up to 1,000. Again, just because we're looking at rare events, it's important to have a large sample size. We also ran some test cases up to 2,000 samples just to confirm that the results don't change significantly. And so just to give a really quick recap of what we're doing here, the analytical approach we're taking and how it might be slightly different than other work that's being conducted. So we're looking at this from, again, an analytical perspective where we're simulating grid operations every hour of the year. And we're doing that across 21 different solar years, solar being obviously increasingly important for reliability as these stage 1 and stage 2 projects come online. And then we're also looking at each of those solar years across many, many different random outage draws of the fossil units. So for each of the steam units on the system, each of the gas turbines, each of those has an outage rate, basically looking at the probability or the chance of equipment going down on failure unexpectedly. And so we look at that. That is based off of 5 years of historical outage data, which was selected to be a little bit more conservative relative to the longer term, because we do see a trend in increasing forced outage rates due to environmental compliance and aging equipment. So we look at that across, again, what that turns into over 1,000 years of chronological operation, each one of those looking at 8,760 hours of operation, taking into account the solar variability across each of the different plants and the outage draws of the generators. So we're trying to count the number of times where, because there's forced outages and because potentially the solar resource is low, there's not enough generation, not enough resources to serve the load. And just again, like Rick mentioned, we went back to our April briefing. We said, what are the schedule changes? You see I've highlighted a couple of those in red. But again, we were able to, because when we did that original analysis, we just looked at cases with increasing amounts of PV plus battery. We're able to go back, and no matter how this schedule changes, we can come up with an estimate of what the system looks like at any given change. Again, it's not perfect. It's not rerunning with that exact new schedule, but because we ran it at blocks kind of from 0 megawatts of PV plus storage added all the way up to full stage 1 and stage 2 deployment, and many, many points along the way, we're able to interpolate. So if one plant gets delayed, one plant comes forward, we can just say, you know, inherently we'll be able to come up with a new estimate there. And so again, just what we wanted to do here is to just change the way we're presenting the results, maybe put some of this risk or this loss of load expectation into context. And so what we have here, again, wanted to stress the importance of looking at this on a monthly basis. So risk is not uniform throughout the year. And so what we have on the screen here is looking at a loss of load expectation, and we annualize this here for each month. So essentially what an annualized LOLE is if you had just the month of September that went for all 12 months, you just repeated the month of September, you could expect to have 1.2 days of outage across an entire year. But of course, you know, 1 month is only 30 days. So when you bring that back, essentially what a 1.2 annualized LOLE of days per year, what that equates to is, you know, there's 1 September out of 10 years, there could be an expectation that there's a small shortfall in the amount of resources to serve load. And so we do that, again, this is the current system, this is with AES operational, the current load, all of the current resources, none of the solar plus storage resources. And you can see that risk is very non-uniform throughout the year, and essentially it's tracking the peak load on the system pretty well. And you can see it's highest in the months of September and October, also the highest load months, generally speaking. Sometimes you can see load peak a little bit early in the season. Sometimes it can peak a little bit later into October, even November at times. But essentially what we're showing is 75% of the risk of the system not having enough resources to serve load occurs being during those months from August, September, and October. And specifically September being the highest month at 33% of all the risk. And on the right, just the secondary axis here, just wanted to put that in a loss of load probability. So it's the percent probability of any day within the month having insufficient resources to serve load. So again, you can see for September, it's somewhere between 0.3% and 0.4% of an outage on any given day. So again, really small, less than 1% chance for any given day in the month. And specifically what would have to happen for that to occur is multiple units going on outage unexpectedly at the same time. And so this, again, just wanted to calibrate where this current system is more or less without any changes to AES in stage 1 and stage 2. And you can see there's a dashed line. We have to be a little bit careful about an annual LOLE target. Again, this is conventional or the historic target that was used in previous years of 1 day every 4.5 years. But again, that's an annual target, so it's just drawn as a line. There's always been months that are above that target, always been months that are below it. So again, you just have to be careful in annual target, but we do have it there just for perspective. Now we wanted to show what happens with the AES retirement and stage 1 and stage 2 projects coming in online. And so the black line, same as before, that's the current system. And you can see now with AES retired and a couple different proposed schedules coming online. And so again, if you go back to the previous slide, this is the proposed schedules of the projects as they were a few days ago. Obviously, we just heard news, some projects potentially being accelerated, all of that good news, but this is from a few days ago based on the previous slide. And as you can see, this includes solar and storage projects coming online. So AES West Oahu coming on in September, Mililani 1 in November, and then Waiava in December. Whoop, thanks for that. And then there's 2 lines for the proposed Kapolei energy storage project. So 2 lines being, the green being that project gets delayed till the end of the year, again, the end of 2022. The blue line, the project goes online the very beginning of October. And so what you can see was with AES retiring and the proposed schedules, we are showing an increase in the probability of an outage during that September month. It goes up to just over, again, on an annualized basis, 2 days per year. And again, that's if September were to continue each month of the year. So put that into context, it's essentially once every 6 years, the system would be have insufficient resources to serve load for 1 day. And again, the loss of load probability there on the right, still for any given day in September, less than 0.6% chance. And based on our analysis, we showed, again, this does include, I'll mention, avoided maintenance during this period. So either maintenance is pulled forward and done proactively or pushed a little bit later into the year, into December or January. So that's another thing that's helping out. And you can see in September, we're showing about a 36 megawatt shortfall given to bring the system back to current levels of reliability for that month. That, I will say, is without the 50 megawatts of emergency demand response, which would certainly cover that. And again, based on all the work we've done at this level of penetration, demand response, solar plus storage, standalone battery storage, all of them are essentially equivalent in their ability to provide this capacity value at this low penetration level. So basically, any of the acceleration of the solar plus storage projects would help, emergency demand response would help, and you can see that once once the Kapolei battery storage project does go online, essentially reliability risk goes to 0. The system has sufficient reserves with the KES battery and the near-term additions of this solar plus storage projects. And now we wanted to show, again, this is showing the days per year of having a shortfall event or the probability of having a shortfall event. Again, most of the time, the average shortfall would be about an hour and would be 30 megawatts or less. So very rare events, and when they do occur, fairly small events, but there is what we're showing from a probabilistic assessment, an increase in risk, again, for that September month. And certainly if all the projects start to get delayed, you'd see some shift up in these later months as well. So schedule is important, and September being the most important based on this analysis. And we just wanted to give, I think one thing that was missing out of some of the previous presentation is what these shortfalls look like and basically how the dispatch and how the analysis is being conducted. So here we have 3 days where we're showing the system is insufficient to serve load. Again, these are very rare events. 1 day out of 10 Septembers, there would be 1 day that looks like one of these. And again, most of them, the average period when you do have a shortfall would look something like this. You lose about 27 to 30 megawatts of load. That constitutes about 2-3% of load during system peak, and it lasts for about an hour. And so again, that's most of the shortfalls would look something like that. Here's a severe example in the middle. So again, a rare event, and then of those rare events, this is a severe example. So this is a very low probability or chance of occurring. It would be about a 75 megawatt shortfall, a 6% drop in system load for a few hours. And then over to the right, this is the most extreme example. This is the 99th percentile. So this, it's here to show what the system, the worst case scenario could look like. But again, this would be a very rare event of any of these occurring. And then when that does occur, this is the most extreme of those events. And so this is many things going wrong. It's a low solar day, as you can see. And then on top of that, it's multiple generators being on outage. You can see the steam units here drop down in the middle of the day and don't come back up, and that's essentially a forced outage. That's the equipment going on failure. So just wanted to show kind of what this looks like, both in terms of how much load might be shed in some of these examples, and then basically how the modeling is being conducted as well. And so this is a chart that's similar to one we shared back in April. We, again, adjusted based on some of the timelines of the projects. And again, started here in January 2023. We already showed that September is a little bit higher, a tight reserve period, but then it drops back down to normal levels. And you can see that as soon as the system gets to that September and October period, because load is lower during those winter months, the system really doesn't need more capacity until we get to the next summer. And by that time, again, projections that Kapolei Energy Storage would be online, a couple more of the solar plus storage projects. But you can see in that July-August timeframe, the capacity need does start to go back up. And you can see that if KES was delayed or canceled or something happened to that project, and we started to see delays in some of the other larger solar plus storage projects, you can see it's conceivable that July and August, the next summer, gets to be a little bit higher risk again. But again, that would be multiple delays or cancellations taking place. And then as the solar plus storage projects to continue to come online, showing plenty of firm capacity capability into the remaining part of the year and into 2024. Certainly, if full deployment of stage 1, stage 2, and the Kapolei Energy Storage System, we're showing excess capacity and potentially the ability to start retiring additional plants at that point. And again, none of this includes the 50 megawatts of emergency demand response, which would certainly help out as well, or some of the other proposals. So quick summary just to wrap up, and we can jump into Q&A. So again, without mitigation, if AES is retired and we don't have Kapolei Energy Storage or any of the other projects move forward, or the 50 megawatts of emergency demand response, we're moving from a risk in September of once out of every 10 Septembers to once out of every 6. So again, it is an increase. It's not necessarily like we're going to be running into rolling blackouts. It's just the probability starts to increase. That's all. Any delays in AES West Oahu would certainly increase the risk to about an additional once out of every 5 Septembers. So certainly that project important to stay on progress. Accelerating any project of 40 megawatts or more before September 1st. That really mitigates all of the reliability risks. It brings the system back to its current level. And again, that can be demand response, it can be solar plus storage, it can be standalone storage. There's a lot of options there. And again, if the stage 1 and stage 2 projects or Kapolei battery comes online, as soon as that occurs, the risk is really mitigated all the way through the following September. And then after that point, capacity needs do start to come up, but as long as even half of the projects come online as planned, showing sufficient reserves throughout that period. Again, once we have full deployment of all the proposed projects, there's other analysis that we've done that not shown here that does indicate we could potentially push forward past YL 3, 4, and potentially even 5 and 6. I think the only other one I missed is on the back end of that schedule. I think Mahi Solar, some of the later projects, if they are pulled forward, it's obviously it helps. It's a little less critical if some of those other pieces come forward. So I think that's all. Rick, anything else you wanted to add to that before we jump into questions? Oh, you're on mute, Rick.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Derek. I think we'll turn it over to questions and go from there.
Thanks, Derek and Rick. I know Commissioner Potter has a question.
Hi, Derek. Hi, Rick. Great to see you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing for the state. We really appreciate it. I have just a couple of questions. There's a lot of assumptions obviously baked into this. And one of the concerns I have is the actual dispatch and operation of batteries in particular. And so there's often challenges in bringing them online and learning how to integrate them into the system. And so I know that that's probably not something that you could take into consideration, but is it something that you acknowledged within your research that you know that there actually could, even if they're brought online on time, there could be hiccups and how we actually learn to integrate them into the system. And so therefore reliability would be jeopardized. Is that something?
Yeah. So and Rick, I'll take a first pass and then feel free to chime in. So we have considered that. You're right that we didn't assume a large forced outage rate on the solar plus storage systems. From a mechanical failure perspective, the systems are fairly modular. You know, absent a large fire or something like that, the systems are modular. So if there is a mechanical failure, it would likely be a portion of one of the plants. And because we have multiple plants across the system, and within the plants, it's modular. So likely you'd only lose maybe 5 to 10%, maybe one inverter goes down at one plant. We made the assumption that we weren't looking at a large correlated outage where you have a large portion of the solar plus storage going out outage. Now, obviously that, doesn't look at anything like catastrophic, like a fire taking place at one of the facilities. It also doesn't take into account, like, as you say, the first few months of getting a new project and new technology up and running, there might be increased failure reasons to bring it back down. So you're right, it didn't look at that. Certainly, especially in those early months, if there's outages like that on the solar plus storage or the standalone storage, that could jeopardize the system reliability. The other piece of your question was the dispatch and how they're actually operated. Fortunately, especially in these early levels of solar and storage integration, almost all of the risk is really during those peak load hours. So even if you're not being creative in how you're scheduling and dispatching the batteries, using kind of conventional, we need the storage online to generate during the evening peak, that's going to cover almost all of these events. And you can see that here. It doesn't, regardless of how sophisticated the storage dispatch is, if you just say, make sure you're available during those 4 peak load hours of the day, I think that's going to get you 99% of all of these events.
And I would just add to that, I think it's an excellent question. We've discussed it at length. It hasn't really been built into the models due to, I'd say, a lack of data and what to put in. So we could make up some assumptions and do it and look. Again, it's going to come down to those periods that are shown that if we don't have something, we start to get the tight reserves. If some of the systems that are on are then becoming unavailable, they'll become tighter still. I think something would be worth doing is there's starting to be enough systems out there, is to really try to get our hands on some of the availability data of these commercial systems and see what the historical experience has been on those systems. We have some on smaller batteries that we use for experimental purposes, but I don't think those are necessarily a valid measure of what we're likely to find on these bigger systems. So that is something that probably needs to be built in, particularly as I think we go into the fall of 23 and we're depending that much more on the solar as our to provide those reserves. As the graph showed, even if we're delayed in the fall of this year, while it increases risk, it's not putting us, it's a factor of, a 60% increase, a 1 in 6 chance of an outage in September, likely to be a relatively short period of time as opposed to 1 in 10. That situation could be more serious next fall, where more of the solar and storage is required to meet those reserve requirements. So it definitely is worth looking at. Thank you.
Both. They're back to you.
Hi, I have a few questions, but I want to thank you guys again for continuing to help us provide insight into what we're venturing into the future. So thanks, Rick. Thanks, Derek. Derek, if you could maybe go to slide 5. Yeah, this one. Okay, so I just want to maybe break this down a little bit so people have the right context. And and it builds on slide 4, but if we stay here, so the black line is the level of reliability risk today, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Or it's in that year 2022 if you didn't, like 2022 to 2023 without any additional changes taking place.
Okay, but no absent any change. This is kind of what we live with today. And if we think of that as a threshold that we want to live within, right, we're not trying to increase, even though, you know, you point out that the actual risk of an outage may be small, but you know, that's the whole principle of power system planning, is that, you know, they're very seriously impactful when they happen, even if it's a small chunk of the total. If you're one of those people, when I look at those graphs, they're at nighttime, at a time of year when you probably really want your AC on. So again, try to keep in mind the real impact on people here when we look at these lines. So the black line is the level of risk that we live with today. And what you're showing is come next September, given our current schedules, we're above it. It's not, and quantifying that in a level of additional capacity that we need to move back down to the black line. So you know, the bottom line is that we need 40 megawatts of roughly something to get us back to that black line. Was noted, the commission is approved with the support of the stakeholders emergency demand response program that we want to see launched immediately. So as much of that can be online by this time next September, that'll shrink that gap, and it will pick this conversation up, I think, with the task force and others to make sure that the pathways for the folks that want to participate in that program are as smooth as possible, as that'll shrink the gap here. And then, as you point out, there's really 2 levers left. There's, from what we heard about earlier, the Mililani 1 project can move ahead of this time frame, and then also trying to hold the line on the AES West Oahu project. That actually, I think when you look at the detailed commercial operations date, it's actually after the 1st of September, but the beginning of the month. So, you know, if we look at where we all target our time and resources and what can shrink this, that seems to be the basket as it stands today. I also want to ask and point out where there's a lot embedded in the curves. I want to better understand what the risk is. And you made this comment, really the risk of an outage at this point, because so few projects are online, is if we have outage for customers, but if we have multiple generating units on outage, that's really where all the risk is when we get to this point, right? Because we're largely going to be relying on the changes to the maintenance schedule, which what in effect that means, as I understand it, is that we're trying to align things so that more of the existing generating units will be online next fall. And so what we're riding on here is that those existing generating units, you know, operate as expected, if not better. And our risk is if they don't, and we particularly have a number of them at the same time go out. Is that a fair characterization here?
Yeah, I think it's fair. It's what's causing most of those shortfall events is, well, unlikely the probability of 3 or 4 units being unavailable due to a failure of some sort.
Okay, so yeah, the idea of and what underlies this is correlated risk, right? One thing happens and it triggers others. And so I can see a couple sources of that. One, that we actually have heard some of this from KIUC, that one of the critical items for maintaining the battery systems is the HVAC, basically making sure the containers themselves stay within certain temperature ranges. So hot weather, multiple systems going out is a possibility that that's something that we need to be mindful of as we depend more on the battery systems. But that's a possible source of, again, what I would say correlated risk.
Chair, if I could say one thing, in that first September period, that system, the point that's shown there that shows the shortfall of 36 megawatts and some increase, is only predicated on AES being in place. So in terms of risk, assuming that the maintenance is appropriately done, prior to that 3-month period, so that the forced outage and regular maintenance schedule is not worse, that system is a fairly well-known system. I think the risk of this uncertainty of maybe the batteries and whether it's HVAC or it's inverters is going to be an even more significant issue to address come next fall, when a greater fraction of the system is dependent on the solar and the battery and the inverters.
Thanks, Rick. You clarified what I meant, is that risk actually carries through into 2023 next year. And it's a follow-up to some of the questions on battery availability. Derek mentioned fire, which let's not forget that's actually happened here. But based on what we've heard from KIUC with their availability of systems, it seems more tied to the availability and the HVAC systems. But getting back to September, again, this seems like the risk here is on the back of the existing generating units. We're going to get to that in a little bit. It's not so much tied to your guys' presentation, but it does seem like there's a correlated risk there with the grid charge battery systems. And I'm not sure if your analysis captures that, meaning you have multiple units on outage and you have batteries depending on those to charge. Is that, if you discounted that availability based on that?
Yeah, that would be taken into account. Essentially for the grid scale or the grid charging batteries, the standalone batteries, those do have to charge from somewhere. So if there's outages that occur earlier in the day that potentially limit the charging, that would be taken into account by the method. I think for the most part, there's a lot less risk given the amount of surplus capacity in the middle of the day than the evening periods. So the likelihood of that occurring is lower at current levels. I think, again, when you get further along in the solar plus storage and those become a larger portion of the mix, that could crop up as a bigger risk.
Okay, so that's really helpful so far. So I think, we have a near-term focus for next September and a mid-2023 focus to make sure things come online, and we kind of handled the various different contingencies. I just wanted to close with what you had at the very end, Derek, which was, you brought up something that hasn't actually been analyzed yet, and is the path ahead that, we're setting the stage for, multiple additional retirements. So everything, as painful as it has been, the lessons we're going to learn are going to allow us to ideally go through that more smoothly. To the extent you can characterize, you say it's preliminary but not shown. I guess, can you further elaborate on that last point?
Yeah, so what we've shown is that with this full deployment of stage 1, stage 2, and KES, kind of this January 2024, we've used the same methodology. We've taken out YO 3 and 4, reran it. It showed 0 reliability risk. So again, that this line here stays at 0 as long as everything's in. And that is true also of YO 5 and 6 being retired. After that point, what we've shown is you can't necessarily get there with more and more 4-hour storage. There might be a need for something else, but that's, I think, post YO 3 through 6. Again, I think at that level of solar plus storage integration and relying on storage systems for the bulk of the capacity and further retirements, I think that's when you really want to sharpen the pencil on the forced outage rates of the system, all the other potential uncertainties. But so far, what we've shown is reliability risk essentially stays at 0 through YO 3 through 6. If you do the math, it's essentially 500 megawatts of solar and storage, or 500 megawatts of storage. And I think the cumulative retirements at that stage would be, I can't do the math in my head, but still less than 500. All right, so.
Okay, thanks. I think that covers all the questions that I have. Thanks again for both of your participation, updating the work here. So with that, we're going to shift on the agenda to what we termed here as follow-up to the Commission's information requests that were sent in we think we had few different batches of them. And so I guess I first want to ask Hawaiian Electric, I don't think you'd prepared any additional summary or presentation on that material. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chair, this is Colton Ching. We haven't submitted any prepared materials, but we did take some of the responses that we provided in the IRs and created some charts that might make the Q&A more clear. So we can, if allowable, and if you prefer, we can share that and then submit it after the meeting.
Sure. So you want to start with that and then submit it afterwards? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, I'd be happy to cover the slides. Andrew, am I able to share slides? Let me bring it up. Give me a second.
Colton, you should be able to share.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you all see this?
Yep, it's coming through, Colton. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So Chair Griffin, commissioners, commission staff, what we put together here, and I'll cover in a couple of slides, is a graphical representation of our energy reserve margin calculations for a few different scenarios, to take some of the tables that we provided in our responses and put it in a chart form that hopefully may be a little bit easier to digest. I want to start off with this slide, which really doesn't just provide the information that we responded to in our IRs, but tries to update that for some recent PUC orders that fortunately we've gotten the last week and a half or so. So it's sort of an update from what we're even in our IR responses. And so what the blue line shows, and with that sort of small section in green here in the fall of 2022, this shows our calculated energy reserve margin for the Oahu system for each of the months going from January of this year through the ending of 2025, the similar time frame in the IR response. But updates the energy reserve margin calculations for several recent developments. It includes the projected impact of the emergency demand response program. It includes the ramp up and projected impacts of the additional grid services procurement. It includes the acceleration of the two Clearway projects and the Mahi solar project. And it incorporates one more recent update to our planned maintenance schedules. And so when you incorporate all of those recent changes, as well as the approval of the KES project and its GCOD date of either October or December of 2021. December is shown in green, October is shown in blue. You can see the projected energy reserve margin by month in that blue line over the future months, compared to our energy reserve margin criteria that we use of having a minimum of 30% of reserves in energy. And so you can see with the combined impact of all of these things, right, including the either the existing or accelerated schedules for stage 1 and stage 2 projects, as well as the new additional or ramped up resources that I just mentioned, and a small adjustment to our maintenance schedule. You can see our energy reserve margin numbers shown here in blue. To kind of take that total impact and then tie it back to our IR responses. This slide here shows the same time frame. This slide shows two lines, both of which assumes that the KES battery goes into service in December of 2022. The gray line shows what our energy reserve margin calculation is over the same period with KES's December service date, but without the impacts and benefits of the acceleration of Clearway and Mahi projects, as well as without the impacts of the ramping up of the EDR and GSPA. Also doesn't include the most recent tweaking of our maintenance schedule. So the gray line essentially ties to the tables that we provided, I think, in an IR response. And just to give you a comparison for that particular scenario, the green line represents the same KES service date, the same timing for the other stage 1 and stage 2 projects, but again shows the impact of the acceleration of Clearway and Mahi and the contributions from the emergency demand response, the GSPA, and the tweaking of our maintenance schedules in 2022 and 2023. So we just pull these slides together to kind of give you a visual image. Again, these lines here on the chart are intended to provide our calculated energy reserve margin for each month relative to the criteria we use of 30%, which is that red line. So it's a little bit backwards from the material is presented in a way a little bit backwards from how Telos provided. So Telos showed higher lines showing periods of higher risk or higher probabilities of an outage. Because we're showing energy reserve margin calculations, being above the line shows that we're better in reliability than our criteria. And perhaps I should have made that clarification from the very beginning. So in our charts here, this chart and the chart I showed before, having our lines remain above the red line shows that we are better than or above our criteria in terms of reliability on the Oahu generation system. Chair, that's all I had in terms of slides. I have another slide which shows the same data, but with an October service date for KES.
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay, so again, very minor adjustments, different set of colors to differentiate it, but this shows basically the same set of scenarios as the slide before, but this assumes an October service date for KS. And then, again, the two lines shows the impact of the acceleration of the Clearway and Mahi projects, as well as the contribution from the emergency demand response, the GSPA, and the tweaking of our maintenance schedules. So Chair, I'll turn it back to you. That concludes the slides, and we can send it over to you after today's conference.
Yes, please. I think our chief counsel will be following up to make sure this is filed as well. Thank you for the updates. And with that, I checked with Dean Nishina. We have on our agenda any follow-up questions from Dean and his staff. So Dean, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, I'm going to ask if Marcy Chang, our chief engineer, could ask her questions first, and then depending on what the time is and whatnot, I might have a couple to add after that, if that's okay with you.
Oh, thanks, Dean.
Marcy, did you want to ask your questions?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Sorry, I was giving more thought to the slides that Colton just presented. Because I think we had the same question that I think Chair had earlier on about the differences between the company's analysis and the IR responses to HNEI. But looking at the slides, I have a different question. I think, is it like there is a recognition that HNEI is looking at loss of load expectation, and the company is doing a energy reserve margin calculation. But within the loss of load expectation, we've heard HNEI talk about the risk evaluation. And I'm kind of wondering on the ERM side, how is that taken into consideration, that risk? Or is it trying to measure it off the 30% margin, whether, there might be outages of a generating unit or a resource? Do we need to look at it that way? I'm trying to figure out how do you compare the results, because the results are different, in nature.
Yeah, that's right, Marcy. And short answer is that's why we have an energy reserve margin criteria of 30% to account for those things and other things. But I'll pass it on to Mark if he wants to elaborate on Marcy's question.
Yeah, thanks, Colton. So Marcy, yeah, I think when we developed the energy reserve margin, we considered, different types of events occurring. So it's measuring risk in a slightly different way. But we do the 30% guideline, was developed to, sort of look at different scenarios where you could have units on forced outage or, low solar output days, things of that nature. So it takes into account, various things that might occur on the system.
Yeah, and to add to what Mark said, and I welcome Bob to jump in here. With our current maintenance schedule, to give you a data point, Marcy, with our current maintenance schedule in this critical September of 2022 timeframe, our schedule compared to our projected loads will have, I think, slightly over 300 megawatts of generating capacity available to us above the projected load and units on maintenance in that time frame to be there to run or to be dispatched higher if we are to have unanticipated operating issues with either any one of our units or other firm generators on the system. Bob, did I cover it well, or anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you did cover that well. In September of 2022, we're going to have over 300 megawatts of units that aren't being used to serve the load available to meet the load, which is not dissimilar to what we've had in much of the period in 2017, 2018. It's not that unusual for us to see those types of numbers. So that's why we feel comfortable.
Yeah, and I think thank you. I think I raised this before as a question because the loss of load expectation on loss of load probability, the prior criteria the company was using actually kind of converts it to like a risk factor of outage per year. Yeah. So is there a way to look at the ERM in that way too? Or I guess convert it to that, or
So the ERM currently, as it's in how it's constructed, won't by its number tell you the probability of an outage over a particular time frame. But the 30% was selected to when we created the criteria, we benchmarked it against our existing reliability guideline, which is the 4.5 years per day, to look at what level of energy reserves we needed under a range of circumstances that correlates to that 1 in 4.5 year per day. To the comment that Derek mentioned in looking at different situations that may have either higher or lower probabilities, of an outage due to a generation shortfall occurring. The closest correlation to that from the ERM, Marcy, would be to look at where we are or where we calculate to be in our energy reserve margin numbers relative to that 30%. But it won't, so if we're above the 30%, by extension, it implies that the likelihood of a generation caused outage will be lower, but it won't translate that directly into so many years per day, like we have in a loss of load probability.
Okay, thank you. No, that's helpful. I think we'll give more thought to that. I think what we're trying to do is measure, I guess, the risk and try to explain it to customers. Yeah, what is the risk of a outage based on the ERM? It sounds like because it was benchmark, I think we have to give some thought to the benchmark of that 4.5 years on the loss of load probability. Thank you. The other question I had, and it's not a specific question, but more thoughts. There was the system impact study that was provided in IR 19. And I know that you folks are noting that you're gonna present the details of that study in a future IGP meeting. But one thing I saw in the recommendations was that there are some recommendations to the inverter settings, which also included settings to DER resources. Yeah, and I'm not, I have to take that back, how if there's an impact to either Rule 14H or I know the URP settings are currently under review, but if that may be changed and if you folks can cover that in the future IGP meeting, that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Marcy. We're trying to see if we can schedule an IGB technical working group meeting next week, as early as next week, to present the findings. It's a really good, very insightful report, but it's pretty dense and very technical. So we thought it'd be helpful to everyone, including ourselves, to have a discussion around a presentation of those results.
Okay, thank you. And then Chair Griffin, if you don't mind, I have a question that's not on the IRs, but it was a discussion point that was talked about today, if I could bring that up.
Sure, please go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you. I was kind of noting, in the May status report, and it was noted in the HNEI study about the dates for the KES project, which they're kind of noting in the status report is related to the global shortage on raw materials for solar panels and batteries, more so for batteries for them. But I was kind of wondering if the company and the developers have had, the other developers have had discussions about that shortage on their projects, and not just for utility scale, but CBRE and also for DR resources, whether that issue would come up with their projects.
And Marcy,
I can start.
yeah, I was just gonna ask if
Oh,
Becca
sorry, am I broken?
if Becca could respond to your question or your comment.
Oh, okay. I guess in the May status report, one of the things KES was discussing was about the issues with delays because of the shortage on raw materials for, so I guess for batteries in their case, yeah. And that there are several articles, yeah, regarding this. And I was kind of wondering how that may impact the other projects, or if you folks are in discussions with the developers for utility scale, CBRE, and also on the DER resources side.
Sure, I can start, and I welcome the developers that are online to chime in too if they have other thoughts. But I think all of the developers have expressed concern with supply chain, but KES in particular was the earliest stage 2 project scheduled to be online. So I think given the shorter time from when they were selected to their early procurement date, that puts them in a slightly unique situation compared to stage 1 developers who have been, selected and contracted for a while, and then the other stage 2 developers, which had a little bit longer of a lead time before their GCOD. So I think KES in that regard was in a unique situation in terms of timing.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions that I had. Dean, if you had any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. If I can, I'm just going to ask one question because some of the questions you asked kind of were in the same vein of what I wanted to ask. But to the Hawaiian Electric folk, kind of going off some of the earlier questions, including when Chair Griffin asked you folks whether or not there was a need to contemplate looking at the proposal that AES has put on the table, and as well as the other things that are going on now. I may be asking you folks to oversimplify, but if I can, it seems like you folks are fairly confident that because the projections right now don't take the lines below the 30% reserve margin, that there's a low level of comfort there. But with the possibility of, say, some of the maintenance being not going as planned, or other projects possibly running into further delays, whether it's because of the shortage or other things, are there any other contingencies that Hawaiian Electric is contemplating? And if so, can you kind of outline what those are and what the triggers would be before those contingency plans would need to be examined?
So Dean, this is Colton. I'll take a first swing at responding to your question, and I'll ask the others from Hawaiian Electric to join in. I don't know if this sort of meets your definition of contingencies, but in terms of the way I kind of think about it is, what can be done to either have a program in place or something in the ground operating that we would want to have to be additional backstops, right, to deal with uncertainty of things happening. And I think collectively between project developers, the PUC, the various state and county agencies that have a very important review process in projects there, all have been working hard towards finding ways to bring additional options on the table. So when I showed you that first slide that shows if you had all of those resources coming online where we plan, we will be in upwards of 50-60% energy reserve margin when all of those things happen. So to the fact that we've been collectively pulling on so many things to contribute towards that, I think we're in a good place to be able to keep the lights on, continue to serve load reliably from our generation system, even if some of those things were not to happen or were to be delayed. And again, both the presentations that HNEI and Telos provided and the slides that I showed, really these are calculations of the reliability of a system, right? They're not a calculation of an outage happening. So there are more things that might need to happen before you get an outage, or it's a probability of many things happening that result in an outage. So we definitely feel comfortable that with all of these things before us, we're in a good place. Having said that, and again, this is where I'm not sure if you would constitute this as a contingency, but there are times in the past where we've had to call for conservation. We would have to proactively trigger some of what today is our existing demand response programs to have customers move some of their load that are participating in a program, move their load off of being served by the grid to being either turned off or being served by their own generation. Those are the kinds of things that are also there before us, right? When we ask customers to conserve because there's a number of unplanned things happening, this is even before AES. It's been a very helpful response that our customers have provided. So it's those kinds of operational activities that we look at. We'd also look at, further changes to our maintenance schedules, just to really make sure we're clear in how we're communicating this. The maintenance schedules that we're using to develop the charts that we shared with you, and I think it's in the data behind the analysis that Telos and HNEI provided, that's based upon us modifying and adjusting, call it optimizing, if you will, our maintenance schedules around these periods of higher risk. That's not a maintenance schedule in which we've yet made the decision to shorten, reduce, or defer maintenance activities for the purposes of giving the system additional available generation to deal with a higher risk period. We're really trying to continue to do the maintenance that we need to do on units, but sequence them and time them in such a way that we give ourselves as much room as possible. So if we find ourselves in a tight situation, I think, and again, I don't know if you'd call this a contingency, but one of the things we would do would to begin looking at what can be done to shorten, compress, reduce, or defer certain maintenance activities that we feel are a good trade-off between the reduction in risk by having more generation available at one time versus the risk we would take on by not doing that maintenance. I think those are some of the examples that we would pull. Again, they're more operational in nature, Dean, so I wouldn't know if you would characterize them as contingency. I'll pause there. Bob, Becca, Mark, others. Anything else? I guess that was it, Dean.
I think you covered it well, Colton.
No, thank you for your response, Colton. I think, yeah, I'll probably need to go back and have a caucus with Marcy about, some of those operational things, what type of capacity or what type of additional space that provides in terms of whether we're relying on asking customers to cut back on their demand on any given period or whatnot, just to get a better sense of what are we talking about additional margin. But your response was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Dean, I'm sorry. I did think of one more thing. I apologize for not mentioning it earlier. So maybe I kind of overlooked the obvious thing because we're doing this all the time. Notwithstanding Clearway and Mahi proposing to accelerate their projects, right? We still continually have discussions with all the other project developers and other projects to see what can be done to bring their projects in. Even if those projects are not in position to move forward officially, their guaranteed commercial operation date, the GCOD, all of the project schedules for each of these projects have energization. And this gets a little bit to Commissioner Potter's question as well. We are looking to see if what can be done to bring that energization in and have power and energy produced by these facilities well in advance of the GCOD, right? To do things not just to de-risk the initial starting up of the unit, right? Where you get those things squared away before you hit the GCOD, but actually have these resources producing at some level and move that forward as much as possible. We continue to look and explore all of those options with the other projects. And again, I don't know if you consider those contingencies, Dean, but that's something we're looking at.
Well, no, thanks. But if I can, just to kind of tag on to what Commissioner Potter was saying, and if I remember correctly, part of the original plan was to have KES come online in June, so you folks would have about 3 months before the retirement of AES to have that shakedown period so that you folks can get the experience of operating the equipment. So even if you bring on some of those things earlier with the energization, but then there are issues that are happening there, even if they come online on schedule as currently planned, that's where I'm trying to get a sense of, what you folks have in your back pocket, so to speak, just in case that there are issues, because not to put KIUC on the under the bus, so to speak. The outages they had, the island-wide outages, their resources were online. It's just that the resources didn't necessarily operate the way they anticipated, and that caused that ultimate island-wide outages that they were having on separate occasions. So that's, again, part of the reason I was asking about that. But thank you for your response. With that, Chair, I appreciate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean and Marcy. I'm going to turn to our Dave Parsons, Chief of Policy and Research, has 1 or 2 questions, he said.
Thank you, Chair. Fulton, I had a couple of follow-up questions about the ERM analysis and the IR responses that you all had provided. So I believe the answer to the response you provided on the 18th indicates that the ERM analysis doesn't include any assumptions about forced outages on the system. So I'm wondering, does that mean that your ERM analysis is essentially assuming sort of perfect conditions, that all of the units are operating normally, and that weather and load is perfectly understood in all hours, and that there's really, the reason why there's no forced outages assumed is because that's the way the analysis is set up? It's deterministic, in other words.
Yeah, Dave. Yeah, thanks for that question. So that accounting for forced outage rates, and other things that may result in a unit being unavailable is really part of that 30% reserve margin that we set. Mark, did you want to expand on how we account for it in the methodology?
Yeah, no, that's right, Colton. So the 30% does assume a level of forced outage occurring. It's part of the 30% is to cover multiple things that may happen. So it's not like an exact or number per se, megawatt number, but we do. And as Bob or I think Colton mentioned earlier, during that September timeframe, we expect to have approximately 300 megawatts of reserve capacity. So that translates to, depending on which units, it could be anywhere from 2 to 4 units not being available, and us still being able to meet the forecasted peak.
Okay, yeah. So if I understand it right, the 30% is kind of a rule of thumb in order to give you confidence that you have enough extra capacity should any one of these other things not work out according to plan. It's not based on any actual assessment of the probability or risk associated with any of those potential problems. It's just a buffer, essentially.
Yeah, we did, when we developed that 30%, we did look at historically what the forced outage rates look like, and then also taking into account, things like uncertainty around weather, solar and wind production. So those were all factors in coming up with the 30%.
Okay, and I guess, well, my question is, I understand the expediency of using sort of a blunt assumption like this 30% for purposes of capacity expansion modeling, and I'm wondering if it's the intent, your intent to sort of expand this approach into the reliability analysis on a more permanent basis. Are you abandoning sort of the probabilistic or stochastic kinds of reliability analyses going forward, and using this deterministic approach to do the kind of reliability analysis that we've seen in the past, or that we're going to need probably more and more going into the future?
Yeah, So the intention isn't to abandon a probabilistic method. I think some of the discussions we've been having in the integrated grid planning process, as well as with the technical advisory panel, is to move towards a methodology like the energy reserve margin that more accurately, looks at reliability on an hourly basis, whereas traditionally things like loss of load probability specifically just looked at the peak hour of an entire year. And Derek can chime in too, because we've had some of these discussions that directionally ERM is something that the industry is or should be moving towards. And I think, we're kind of exploring ways now how to improve what we've proposed and potentially adding some of those other elements to the reliability planning.
No, I appreciate that. I think, and just to be clear, doing a chronological analysis like ERM is not the same thing as doing it chronologically and probabilistically, which is what I believe the analysis that Telos and HNEI has provided. So I agree that for purposes of capacity expansion modeling, using more of the chronological approach is useful and is a good direction to move in. But I am, I guess, concerned that this approach is sort of, like I said, blunt and doesn't really help you understand some of the particulars of the risk that that we all may be facing. So, but I look forward to talking about it more, in the context of IGP and other places.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just real quick to add, just going back to what Commissioner Potter raised, and I think Derek touched on it as well, is just, as the industry and as well as Hawaiian Electric gets more experience on the new technologies, there'll be more data to be able to factor into the reliability analysis. I think right now we're making a lot of assumptions on how the systems will perform. But we are sort of leading the way on introducing some of the, like the hybrid plants into the system operationally as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Chair, that's all the questions I have.
Thanks, Steve. I recognize we're up to 10 minutes to when we said we closed, but I think we're going to take a little longer. I know everyone's been here for a while, but I do want to state at the outset that I do see us turning a corner here, and that's encouraging. And I think really the two slides that you presented, Colton, where we're finally pulling together all the different pieces that we put into play that's it's the most encouraging thing I've seen in, I think, at least 9 months. But I have some questions I want to confirm on that, and they're 4 topics. And the first one actually was covered by your 2 slides, and so I want to dig into that a little bit. But I want to look at better confirm the reliability analysis for Oahu. We haven't talked about it here yet, but it was part of our IRs. I want to talk about Maui because we're still not clear we're in a very good situation there currently, and not clear when that's going to change. I know it's been discussed that the grid forming inverter study will be discussed in IGP, but I do want to touch on a few different areas there, and just to maybe give a bit of a preview of that, but better understand what some of the implications of what you've looked at so far. And then I do want to talk about transparency a little bit, but we'll get to that. So on the Oahu question, Colton, maybe if you can put up your slide again, and I guess really maybe use the December, the first one, the December date, because that's the current proposed online date. And I think maybe I have a way of characterizing. I think people have asked this in a variety of different ways, but right, your ERM is just showing how much additional reserve capacity there is above. Please correct me. It's a straight addition and subtraction, and it gives you the line here at 30 to 40%. You look at well, so the formula in the graph there. But I guess what I want to like the different components in this line are changing across this graph. And what I mean there is that in the beginning part, right, we're basically relying on, because there's limited new resources coming online, we're relying on these incremental additions in the grid services and DR program, the ability to bring on the 2 Clearway projects ahead of time, and then the deferred or proactive maintenance schedule. But to get the large percentage of this, it's really relying on the maintenance schedule. Is that, Bob alluded to this, where we should feel okay, we're going to have 300 megawatts of additional capacity, but basically we're again still depending on these existing units to carry us through the beginning part of the graph. That picture is changing over time as new projects come on, and then really the risk is, can they come on that time frame, and are they going to perform as we'd hoped?
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, Chair, the green line again basically counts the contributions from everything, right? You kind of shorthand that. The incremental contribution from the emergency demand response, the tweaking to our maintenance schedule, the additional grid services procurement, and the acceleration of Clearway and Mahi gives you the difference between the gray line and the green line. But to the fact that the gray line, again, without those contributions from those resources, the fact that the gray line remains above the red line, meaning better reliability, more reserve margin, even when AES is shut down, is a result of many things, right? It's all the rest of the units, as you mentioned, being there to maintain reliability, and the amount of units that are there to serve the load during that time frame is impacted by the maintenance schedule that's assumed in here. And so the calculated ERM, I think Derek and Rick will say that in their calculations, what they're finding is that their loss of load expectation calculations is sensitive to the maintenance schedule that you're assuming, and our analysis, whether it's ERM or even our prior analysis using loss of load probability, that's definitely the case as well.
Okay, and well, just so we're in agreement that particularly the beginning part of this graph in the transition point in September, there's really a large dependence on the existing generation fleet, all of it, to carry the day.
From a reliability standpoint, yes, that, and it does assume the addition of AES West Oahu. I just want to be clear about that, but yes.
Because that comes on barely in time.
Yeah, early September.
Okay, and I just want to see Scott and Bob, everyone feels fully comfortable with that.
Well, Chair, if I understand your statement, right, we are currently relying on the system as is, and I think what you're saying is yes, that is going to continue to be the case for the better part of 21 into 22. So yes, we have our existing system as it's currently being operated today.
Okay, because that was, I went back and looked at what our consultant said during the management audit on this topic, and he was not as optimistic. And to give due, he did give, I think, high marks to the power supply unit for their overall cost management. But I have it here. This is page 168 when he talks about power supply, I'm going to read part of it, but he said, should be expected that generation O&M costs will continue to increase. Reliability may reduce as plants age further, but this is the inevitable trade-off, running plant well beyond its design life. We do have concerns that despite best efforts, the risk of failures in parts of the plants, including catastrophic failures, will continue to increase. This could result in some essential plant becoming out of service for an extended period due to non-availability of components. This could potentially stretch overall generation capacity on Oahu to its limits, threatening overall system availability and reliability at peak periods. In our estimation, there's important risk that should not be disregarded and contingency plans should be developed. So he said that before this was in the context of trying to reassure this before this transition. Now during this time period, these are the units that we're saying we're going to depend on. Now I say this so that we're all clear with ourselves where the risk is during this period, and that we continue the urgency with trying to bring things on and spread and diversify this risk. That's what I was trying to say about this line. It's not the contributions to the reserve capacity are changing across this, and as a result, the risk that we're all bearing is going to change over time. In the beginning, really, we are going to have to rely on these units to do as well, if not better, than they have been, and they haven't been trending in that direction from what I understand of the way it's been done. And then as we move forward, we're going to have to make sure that our discipline with the timeline is tight, and if things come up during the commissioning. So just is that again,
I'd say you said it correctly, Chair, right? We will have to continue to move with urgency to diversify as quickly as we can. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one.
Okay.
Contingency options, contingency plans will continue to have to be, we'll try and have to continue to develop those.
Okay, look, where's Bob? This is going to be your responsibility.
Yeah, that's true. And, I think when you look at the management audit and what the auditors said, I think when you look at it from a long-term, medium to long-term type time frame, that is true. We're looking at this. I think for the next year and a half, what we're talking about, getting to the end of 2022, I don't have any concerns with being able to meet the system demand with the existing fleet that we're going to have even without AES. To the extent that emergency DR can come on or other projects can come on, that's always welcome. But I said this in a previous status conference that through the end of 2022, I feel very comfortable that we are going to be able to meet the system needs, and the situation we're going to be in is not very much different than what we've been in on a frequent basis the last several years. Maybe not the last year with COVID with lower peaks, but pre-COVID levels.
And of course, the other big takeaway, which was mentioned previously by this commission, is of course, continue to move forward along the lines of retirement of our old fossil generators. I think that was another big takeaway from the PUC's management audit. So definitely WILE 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on.
Okay, thank you. So I want to just shift the focus to Maui. So we did ask about that. And the initial part of the response was not very comforting, and talked about all the RFPs that had been tried and didn't go anywhere. And just so we're clear, those didn't really go anywhere because they were headed down a path of likely to be high cost resources. So if there was any question about that, we'll be clear about it. So, we didn't move forward, and I think a lot of times that was articulated. So these prior firm RFPs, that was the answer. So your response is we are where we are in 2021. Let me pull it up here. This is IR 7. Okay, page 12 of it. This stage 2021 has arrived. This potential shortfall, and we're talking about, circumstances here where it's projected for 21 and 22 that Maui will be below that line. This potential shortfall can be immediately mitigated by deferring certain planned 2021 maintenance to 2022. Further mitigation through additional grid services, while potentially too late for 2021, could assist in mitigating any potential shortfalls. So again, we're going to have to rely on the existing generation fleet on Maui as well to get through this. And again, confirming that there's the level of comfort with that versus, we'd rather see other things accelerated.
Yeah, Colton, you can talk to specifics, but again, I'll just reiterate again, Chair, our understanding of the situation in terms of trying to be as aggressive as we can, considering all the other options. But
yeah, and Chair, just to add to what Scott said, the situation in Maui is a little bit different. I know you know that the tight situation we see is in 2021, 2022 before retirements. It's really driven by a number of other factors rather than, in the case of Maui, the retirement of Kahului Power Plant. But the resources that we're bringing on in our calculations are mitigating that. And we feel that the period in the 2021 to 2022 timeframe, both the magnitude and the number of instances where we're at lower levels, we feel comfortable that we can mitigate that through adjustments in our maintenance, including the potential for deferring some maintenance from one period of time to another. Does that kind of capture it well, Bob? Anything else?
I think it captures it well for 2021. I think that we have tools to be able to manage it in 2021. If I'm being 100% honest, I'm not as confident about 2022, depending upon what peak loads we see compared to what we've seen in previous years. So I think it'd be fabulous if we could accelerate some projects that are already in the queue. I just don't know if that's plausible.
Okay, we'll get to that in a little bit because we have a bunch of emails talking about one of the projects that could have helped with the situation. But just right, we have now 2 islands. One, seemingly the picture is improving on this island. Maui's a little different situation with historic reliability problems on Molokai Lanai. So this is something that continues to give me concern. We have keeping the lights on is job one, and we're seeing improvement through the collective efforts here, but it's got to continue to happen quicker than it has been. So Scott, I look to you. We got to be able to serve the people of these islands in a reliable manner, correct? It's our first job here.
Absolutely.
Okay. I do want to touch on the grid forming inverter study. So just as an overview for the folks out here, because this is complex, newer edge. I think, can you give there were footnotes giving definitions of a grid forming inverter versus a grid following, but can we break it down even further for the folks following this with the importance of it, right? Because we're anticipating multiple islands operating at pretty much close to 100% renewables during the middle of the day. high degree of inverter-based generation. Kauai has been leading on this and doing it for quite a while, but as a result of these projects, we're now going to be in that moving into that territory on all the different islands here. And so I take that as some of the context for the need for the study. I think I do appreciate and encourage the companies to be proactive about it. But can you kind of give us the overview of why has this emerged as a important requirement at this point? And then I just want to try and confirm at least some of the preliminary takeaways from my read of the study. So please give us the even more basic, the non-engineer, everyone that's not on this call that needs to understand why it's important.
Colton, give us the human version, please.
The human version. Well, I'm an engineer, so I'll try my best to be human. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do in this study is anticipate and understand before these facilities are built what functionality and capabilities collectively they need to provide in conjunction with all of the other resources on the system that will be running along with the projects being studied here as part of electronics' study, to ensure that we can operate these facilities in the way we want to, i.e. operate them in a way where they functionally displace conventional generators. And so we're not running more generators than we need to run the system because there's an essential grid capability or service that requires an existing generator to run. And instead, we want to rely as much as we can, as much as technology and state of the art will allow, to rely on these new facilities to provide the kinds of functions and services to the grid so that we can use them to their most and really understand that before developers invest the money on the equipment and in developing a lot of the software and programming for these facilities that are going to be really critical to ensuring that we get these projects to operate in the way we want. So bottom line, that's what in part this study was intended to do, and to look at it not on an individual project basis, but to understand the combined effect and the combined requirements of all of the projects together, in this case for operating on the island of Oahu as a system. It's very leading edge and it is pretty dense, right? The material is very technical. I know it's very difficult to kind of get it. The report I thought did a fair job of trying to, actually more than a fair job, a very good job of trying to take these really complex leading ideas and put it away that even people like me can understand. And then use that as a basis then to guide the specifics of how the projects are ultimately developed, and then to ultimately guide how we plan to run our system, right? And that's how we want to use these studies. And we want to know it as soon as possible because it's so much easier to ensure that you're fulfilling those requirements now in the early stages of these projects rather than to do it after the fact, right? After the facility is built or something like that. One last thing, I think, to your first question, Chair, and maybe I should have started off with this. We use the term grid forming projects versus grid following. We actually have Andrew Isaacs from Electronics. He's the mastermind and author behind the study work and report that we submitted. But my layman's way to explain it is that a grid following system, a grid following inverter and the system is fundamentally designed to take its cues on how to operate from the grid. It senses what the grid is doing and behaves in a certain way as a result of what it's seeing on the grid. Whereas a grid forming system is one where it has the capability, it has the sophistication and the ability to actually help not just follow what the grid is doing, but to help impose aspects, functionality, things like frequency and voltage and other really important things to help the grid operate the way it should be, the way you'd want to have the grid perform and behave. So it's more of in that leading or active role versus sort of following what the grid is doing. That's sort of my layman's distinction between the two. I'll turn it over to Andrew perhaps to take it to that next level, and he can kind of correct all the course mistakes that I made.
Sure, thanks, and hello everybody. You haven't heard from me before. My name's Andrew. I work with a consulting firm based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada. I'm happy to be here, and I think there'll be a chance, like someone mentioned earlier, maybe Colton, that next week we'll have a chance to present that study in a little bit more detail. Hopefully, then we'll have a chance to dig into any questions that you have about the report. But to your question, Commissioner Griffin, I think Colton is, that's a very nice way to describe it. I think another way that you could maybe characterize this is that the places that you're going in Hawaii and the scenarios that are envisioned in the coming few years, what Derek has presented as resources and how you all think of megawatts being needed. That's a new place for the world, actually. A lot of the world isn't ready for that. The equipment that's currently designed as solar and hybrid, battery hybrid plants, and we do work for interconnection of renewables all over the world, with a few exceptions in the world, such as Australia. We're not there in terms of penetration, in terms of level of interconnection. And so the standard inverter equipment that you buy off of the shelf is not really equipped to provide the level of support that you will need for your envisioned scenarios. So the way that you could characterize grid forming, another way you could characterize grid forming versus grid following, and really these terms have been muddied and dragged through the muck so much that they're quite confusing in general for a lot of people. So I think it's fair to ask this question again and again. But the way that in this context you could imagine grid forming technology is the inverters need to be controlled in such a way that they act a little bit more like and provide the support that you're used to from your thermals. So AES and your other big coal plants, they've been providing a physical stability to your system. They have this rotating inertia that just keeps your system rolling, and the DER and all the inverters that connect to the system are able to synchronize to that and follow along. When you take away those big thermals, something needs to replace that inherent stability. And so you can control inverters in such a way as to mimic that stability. And that's what you really need. And that's what we're looking for from these new inverters. Unfortunately, that's quite new. And so that sort of drives these studies. I hope that helps.
No, I think, thank you, Colton and Andrew. That confirmed my understanding of the topic. And it's really what you said at the end. Particularly, we're not just, particularly as we're trying to take generation offline, right? You need the inverters to play more of the role that existing conventional generation has done in the past. So I have two very basic questions. I read the study. What I want to understand are there delays implicit in the work here? I mean, I've heard multiple of our IPPs talk about they have long lead time purchases, and so are they going to have the requirements that they need in time to make those calls from the analysis here?
So let me ask Jason and others to jump in. And then if we get into the real heavy technical stuff, Andrew, you can augment that.
Well, let me just be clear. I'm not asking for the heavy technical. I'm asking, like, are the IPPs going to get the information in time to make the call and order the equipment that they need on the timelines that they have set out so far? They've been filing those timelines in this docket and with the task force, but right, they need the information from the study to be able to get, so they know what to order. And I think this was what happened in phase one, where the developers went back and forth with what the requirements are. So I just want to be sure, is this work going to be done in time to support the timelines that we're all talking about here?
Yeah, okay, now I understand the question. We're presenting to the developers on Wednesday. So as of beginning of this month, they all received a copy of the report and some recommended settings. So as soon as we meet with them, we'll be following up with them to talk about any settings that we are recommending, because you know, we need to see if those settings can be supported by their equipment. But we are on a good path, I think, in that stance, where the study is mostly done. I mean, well, it's done. We just have to present to developers, get their feedback, and then it'll be continuously working with them to tune their systems. They should still be able to order it, but tuning will have to occur because, you know, it'll be throughout commissioning, because once these do go online, you know, field conditions can only match so much to the simulations, right? So there'll be some tweaking, but, you know, for the most part, they'll have the information they need.
And Chair, maybe just to kind of elaborate on what Jason said, these settings that Jason is referring to is really around the settings on the inverters and control systems associated with these facilities. These requirements aren't so much about, you know, the sizing of a transformer or something like that, right? So it applies to a portion of the facility rather than the entire facility. And so a lot of the other work related to the IRS, including the facility studies, those things, you know, we're doing in parallel. We're tracking those activities where we can identify those requirements separate from these and defined by these studies separately, so that each of the stage 2 developers can proceed with the rest of their design and then ultimately with their facility purchase.
Okay, so they haven't been, well, and what I also noted, at least in what was filed with us, the appendix A to that study that talked about project specific recommendations was blank. So I won't put people on the spot here because I don't think they've had the benefit of the presentation yet, but I just go back to our earlier timelines. There were several projects that are critical to maintaining whichever line you want, but one of them was, well, 2 of them are stage 2 projects. And so it's not clear to me yet that they have, and we heard Ren talk about they needed a decision by us in September so that they could make sure that they order the right equipment. And so I guess what I take from this is that we need to follow up after these deliberations with the developers and make sure that the timelines sync up. That I haven't heard anyone say that everything's okay yet, you know, when we look at those prior slides, the timing of a number of these projects is critical throughout the 22 and 23 timeframe. So it seems like, someone tell me if I'm wrong here, there's something that we need to hear from both sides, both on, you know, after the developers hear the feedback on what's needed and they process what that means for their what current equipment and purchasing. So if everyone here says that it's fine, then well, we're going to follow up, but it seems like so we haven't confirmed the timelines based on the work that's here. Is that the takeaway?
No, that's not quite right, Chair. So as Jason mentioned, this study is complete. There's specific recommendations of settings for each of the projects that are studied in this sort of group study in here. That's been provided to each of those developers, so they have that. we understand that we want to have a discussion around it, and so those are the upcoming meetings.
So is
For
that's
stage-
the appendix that was left blank and what was submitted to us?
Yeah, so each developer got their own specific Appendix A. And we're waiting to have that discussion with the developers, but the commission wants it, we can file them. They will, because they are proprietary, there will be redactions in there, but developers have received the Appendix A. So from their system impact study standpoint, they've actually received all the components of their study so that they could understand, at least from a system impact, what their project has. I believe right now they're all going through the facility study process to come up with the cost and schedule for their interconnection. But study-wise, they're done. They will be getting their packet this week, but they've already gotten the individual components because we're releasing results as we went along, so we could expedite these projects. So as of this week, the bulk of the projects will be done, except for the, like Kamaole, which started later, and some projects that are undergoing some point of interconnection changes. But almost all are done with system impact study and then in their facility study stage.
Okay, so that's helpful, G. So can you confirm yet or not whether there's any delays associated with this?
Not that I'm aware of. At least from the study standpoint, we didn't find for the projects anything that would require some major upgrade. It's pretty straightforward. There might be some operational mitigations that we're going to implement, but no big system things came up. So for developers, you should be good to go. These straightforward from a system impact study standpoint.
And Chair, if I may, the timeline for this IRS is, it's on track with what was built into the developer's schedule. So this is not behind schedule. The developers were, aware of this timeline and it's been built into their project. So there's no delay from that point.
Okay, so we'll follow up later, but what I haven't heard is that developers communicated back and said, yeah, we're okay with, or our timelines will still work with what we have here. So that may be the case, but that hasn't happened yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, in terms of explicit confirmation back from developers, I don't think so.
You don't think so, or you don't know?
I don't think so, because that's really these upcoming meetings, right? They have the information. That's going to be part of what gets discussed in these meetings. One, to make sure that they have a true and accurate understanding of what these recommendations are.
Okay, understood. So there's more follow-up to do. That's understood, but just so it's on everyone's radar. Second area is a topic that was discussed in there. It talked about DER blocking. And maybe think it's Andrew, if you can discuss kind of the interactions with DER that you studied. That we've had, my takeaway from it was there may be recommendations to change the ride-through settings on these systems. And just if you can give some preview of that discussion, because that's something we've spent a fairly extensive amount of time here. And so if the idea here is that we're going to have another round of it, that's something we should all be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a fair reading of the report to understand that there are concerns around the DER to some extent. I think, obviously DER is a huge part of your future on those islands. The scenarios that we evaluated had extremely high dispatch of DER as part of at least in my experience, high, and maybe for you guys that's normal, but 50% is high. And so that amounts to a significant portion of the dynamic response of the system. And so DER, as you all know, I know you've discussed this a lot, but it has some inherent, at least historically, and the DER that's in service all over the world has a few, I don't want to say shortcomings, but disadvantages compared to bulk connected stuff, right? We don't have the same controllability, observability. We don't have necessarily the same ability to provide under frequency response. We don't have, the same fault ride-through capability. They're a lot more difficult to model, significantly more difficult to model and understand, and a number of other things, fault current. The issue that the study really highlighted for us was that according to the DER standards, even the IEEE 1547 and other modern standards for DER and what DER is being built to and installed to, does not require these devices to ride through serious system events with any level of reliability, at least compared to bulk connected generation. So if you have a fault on the system where the voltage drops very low, the DER is prone to just disconnecting temporarily, blocking, we would say, and not coming back until it feels that the system is under control. So that's something that a DER is, by design, going to do. So, distribution planners all over the world have thought of DER as this, extra thing that helps us out when, to offload the load. But now, and so they said, when there's a big transmission fault, we want this DER to go away and come back when things are okay again. On these, future scenarios in Hawaii, that's really problematic, because when we have a deep fault and 50% of your generation temporarily goes away, the frequency tends to go through the floor and things start to trip and cascade off. So that's the risk that the study identified, was this basically ride-through capability of the DER. Now, what can you do about it from a DER standpoint is a much harder question, because this is something you have to procure and implement. I'm not sure how much capability we'll have to go back and change things, so it might be something we have to just live with and mitigate through other mechanisms.
Okay, and we'll dive into this more later, but just to confirm, the study was done using the current ride-through settings we've established in Hawaii, which
right,
are
and actually,
than
yeah. So the study was a bit as nuanced as we could make it. We used as detailed models as we could, but we also used several generations of thresholds for the DER. 3 different generations based on when they were put into service and what the standards were at those times. And there were some, we can go into the details of the DER modeling later, I suppose. There were some conservative elements to that modeling, and some elements which were probably a bit optimistic. But we did account for the different generations of protection standards.
Okay, I think the filing talked about having a briefing on this. Because looking at the Hawaiian Electric team, so Wednesday is the briefing with the developers. When were you planning? I mean, seems like the more immediately we do this, the better. So when is the broader discussion going to happen?
Yeah, so Chair, we've identified next week, Wednesday, the 30th, as a possible date, the morning of. Seems like several folks are available, but so we'll be prepared to do that then. But understand that, we want to make sure we get good participation as well. But we can meet as early as next week, Wednesday.
Okay, I think we'll try and follow up and coordinate. So, all right. Said one last topic. The topic is transparency, and we're going to keep reiterating it. So we did ask in these IRs about the internal company discussions about when the delays were known. People that want to see it, it's in IR7 in the attachments. But I think what's concerning to me is that from what I read, it was as early as last March, looking at the internal emails and the facility studies, that the delays in the projects were known. Looking at the email here on page 7, here's a quick update of our internal team meeting on March 12, 2020. Several of the projects are still in jeopardy of not making the 2022 deadline. But we asked about this over the subsequent multiple months. I never really heard anything until September, October. So, you know, that is past history, but, you know, I think the point here is that we lost a lot of time in the course of that. You know, and now we're looking at these situations on multiple islands. And so I just want to reiterate to Scott and the team is this is something that can't repeat itself. We in agreement?
We are, Chair.
Okay. Okay, let's look at wrapping up. So I think, you know, to the point we've talked about it here, we still are at the point where we have concerns over the reliability on multiple islands. I think we're seeing improvement, but it's still got to stay front and center. So the coordinated work among the stakeholders here, you know, the teamwork that has been happening is encouraging, but it's got to continue over the next 12 months, 24 months. And, you know, we'll do our part on our side, but we need everyone to do it. And, you know, we need the transparency I'm talking about. We can't respond to things that we don't know about. So focus on the two. And the only other one I want to talk about is the part that's been discouraging for me too, is that, you know, when we look at, I mean, in effect, the delays here of they're going to cost all of us, and it's in pure dollars and it's in risk. We've had multiple developers now. I mean, to bring their projects ahead, it's going to cost us, you know, whatever increase in cost it's going to cost us. And this is also on top of, it's been a little bit more under the radar. But you know, we're going to have to pay the cost of the renegotiated fuel supply contract. So that's a significant dollar amount. These are going to cost. There's a pattern of high cost solutions being proposed to this commission. You know, we've got more CapEx proposals in the queue, and you know, we don't have an unlimited capacity to pay for all this. So I know, you know, these things pile up on our desk. We see them cumulatively, but I want to know who's minding the cash register here. You know, these all pile up, and an affirmation that we'd be more mindful of that.
Yeah, Chair, you know, I'll speak on behalf of the company. I mean, I think it's very clear from this commission that cost and cost impacts on our customers is a huge priority, in addition to moving off of fossil fuel as quickly as possible while maintaining reliable service, right? Those are the three big mantras that we are committed to and we should be held accountable for. So again, cost to customers, reliability, as well as decarbonizing our system. You know, we are always trying to understand what the portfolio of our resources will be in terms of providing all of those values to our customers. I think it's fair to say that you know, as much progress as has been made in our state over the last several years, you know, we are at a stage, it's a critical point when we start to retire the older fossil fuel units, the AES coal plant. It's something that we recognize has to be done and will be done. But I think you made the point earlier about urgency and continue to push and push for a diversified future. So I guess that is my affirmation. We have to deliver on all three of those values for our customers.
Okay, and thanks, Scott. I'll thank you too for the direct responses, being here to be accountable. Okay, so that brings us, as we close out this afternoon, I do want to note some of the positives. It was, I think I brought it up with the HNEI presentation, so that we are paving the way for the future retirements here. So the work challenge that we're seeing, you know, it's going to help us on the other islands. It's going to help us with the additional retirements. We look at the group effort, something that we haven't necessarily done here before. So I think that's encouraging. want to thank all the stakeholders that have brought their ideas to the table, even if they're not necessarily going to be popular. And so, we asked for that and want to thank you for that. As far as next steps, we're going to look at the various different proposals that have been discussed here. So folks, please continue and look forward to bring those to us. We will look at the commission, how we address some of these performance gaps. We instituted some measures recently, but we're going to continue to look at that. And with that, I want to bring the afternoon to a close. Thank everyone for their time and participation here. And have a good rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. Thank you to our staff for all your hard work here and help with the support. And thanks for everyone that hung on through the through the various different organizations. Have a good evening. Aloha.
Mahalo. Aloha.